Chapter 55. The sound from the depths of the darkness grew louder and louder. Everyone could already hear the rustling sound. Although they didn't know what the sound was, everyone could guess that it was the footsteps of the monsters that were rushing over. Soon, the sound got closer and closer. Even the creaking sound of the monsters' claws scratching the walls could be heard clearly. Everyone understood that these monsters were about to rush over. Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were so nervous that their palms were sweating. When they heard that the monsters were about to rush over, they couldn't help but grab the hilt of their swords. At the same time, they raised the swords in their hands to the easiest place to attack. Only then did they stare at the dark tunnel. At this moment, Shun Feisher, who was standing in the crowd, was so scared that his face turned ashen. This wasn't to say that he was a coward. It was just that after seeing the tide of red bats, he already had a certain fear of these creatures in his heart. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if he was the only one here, he would definitely turn around and run without hesitation. Mu Hongyi turned his head and saw Shun Feisher's ashen face. He immediately felt a little unhappy. Could it be that some small rats scared you to this extent? Just as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were nervously looking at the tunnel in front of them, suddenly, a black shadow came out of the darkness and pounced at Zhang Yuntao like lightning. Facing the attack of the black shadow, Zhang Yuntao naturally didn't dare to be careless. He flipped the long sword in his hand slightly, and the black shadow, as if walking into a trap, crashed into the long sword in his hand. Immediately, it let out a sizzling sound and hung on the long sword in Mu Hongyi's hand, motionless. It was also at this moment that everyone saw clearly what the monster that pounced over looked like. It was really no different from what everyone had guessed. It was a rat. The only difference was that this rat was much bigger than a normal rat. It was at least 10 times bigger. Everyone carefully looked at the huge rat hanging on Zhang Yuntao's saber and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Not only was this rat big, it also looked very fierce. Its 4 sharp claws had been rubbed against the rocks all year round. They had long been sharpened and emitted a dark light. The scariest thing was that there were 4 long fangs in front of the rat's mouth. These 4 fangs shone with a cold light under the dim red light. No one dared to doubt the damage it could cause. Creak, creak. The rats that Mu Hongyi and the others encountered were the same rats that the Fierce Wind mercenary group had encountered. While Mu Hongyi and the others were still in a daze, a few more large-toothed rats rushed up. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly swung the tip of his saber and flung the hanging large-toothed rat to the side. Then, he pointed the saber forward and stabbed a large-toothed rat that was charging over. A large group of large-toothed rats had already rushed up. Although Zhang Yuntao had killed 1 large-toothed rat, a few more large-toothed rats were rushing up from the cliff. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao's expression changed. He did not bother to get rid of the giant-toothed rat hanging on his saber. Instead, he hurriedly brandished his saber and slashed at the few giant-toothed rats that were charging at him from the rock wall. Although the few large-toothed rats that were rushing over from the cliff wall were very fast, the saber in Zhang Yuntao's hand was definitely not to be trifled with. A cold light flashed in front of him, and 3 large-toothed rats that had rushed over from the rock wall were swept away by him and fell to the ground. Although Zhang Yuntao had blocked these 3 giant-toothed rats, there were more and more giant-toothed rats rushing over. Just as Zhang Yuntao withdrew his saber, more than a dozen giant-toothed rats rushed over from the ground and the rock wall. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to hold back anymore. He immediately waved the saber in his hand and swept it in front of him. The saber flashed past, and suddenly, there was a burst of screams in front of Zhang Yuntao. The next moment, more than a dozen giant-toothed rats that had rushed over in front of him were swept away by Zhang Yuntao. At that time, when the Fierce Wind mercenary group was dealing with these giant-toothed rats, it was not as easy as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji. Of course, this did not mean that Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji's martial arts were better than theirs. It was because Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji both used short sabers. In this narrow passage, their sabers could be extended freely. Lowell was fighting very hard at that time. On the other hand, Field, who was beside him, seemed to be slightly more relaxed. This did not mean that Field was better than Lowell. It was just that the mace in Lowell's hand was too long. In this passage, it could not be extended. Zhang Yuntao killed more than a dozen giant-toothed rats in a short period of time. Lan Ji, who was beside him, killed more giant-toothed rats than he did. Although the two of them slashed wildly, there were too many giant-toothed rats. It was as if there was no end to them. As soon as Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji cleared the area in front of them, more giant-toothed rats immediately rushed over. Seeing that there were more and more giant-toothed rats in front of them, Hodaki suddenly took out a white arrow from behind his back and knocked it on the bowstring. Then, he slowly began to draw the bow. Just as Hodaki was drawing the bow, a breeze began to gather around him. After a while, he suddenly shouted, "Zhang Yuntao, get down!" The few of them had been together for many years and had cooperated with each other many times in battle. At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji, who were in front of them, heard Hodaki shout and immediately understood. They began to exert their strength at the same time and swung their swords with all their might. They swept away all the giant-toothed rats in front of them and immediately got down on the ground. Not long after the two of them got down, Hodaki shouted again, "Wave arrow!" As soon as Hodaki finished speaking, his fingers loosened and the white arrow on the bowstring rolled up a gust of wind and flew into the dark passage. Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji only felt a gust of wind blow over their heads. In the next moment, they heard the screams of the giant-toothed rats in front of them. The white arrow contained the true power that Hodaki poured into it. It rolled up a gust of wind and flew towards the large group of giant-toothed rats that were rushing over. When the white arrow flew over, all the giant-toothed rats within a 1-meter radius of the arrow were blown into pieces by the gust of wind. After the white arrow flew over and cleared out a large group of giant-toothed rats, it crashed into the rock wall and fell to the ground. At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji stood up and once again waved the swords in their hands and slashed at the remaining giant-toothed rats. Although Hodaki's move was powerful, it had a small range. Only the giant-toothed rats within a 1-meter radius of the white arrow were affected. The giant-toothed rats outside of this range were not affected at all and continued to rush towards Zhang Yuntao and Lan Ji. Although there were still many giant-toothed rats rushing over, compared to before, there were much fewer of them. Chapter 56. After Hodaki's wave arrow flew past, it also bought a moment for Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong to catch their breath. However, it was really only a moment. Soon, a large number of large-toothed rats rushed out of the darkness again, squeaking and rushing towards Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong who were in front of them. Faced with a large number of large-toothed rats rushing over, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were once again in danger. Mu Hongyi saw that the situation in front was critical and could not help but frown. He lowered his head and thought for a moment before turning back and saying, "There are too many large-toothed rats in front. Let's all take turns to use our skills to attack those large-toothed rats." Hearing this, everyone nodded their heads one after another. The situation was critical now. If they did not think of a way, they were afraid that everyone would be trapped here. Everyone rubbed their fists and began to prepare to use their best skills. Seeing that everyone was almost ready, Mu Hongyi asked in a low voice, "Who will go first?" As soon as Mu Hongyi's voice fell, Fan Shouwu took the initiative to walk in front of him and said, "My martial arts skills are low. Let me throw a brick to attract the jade first." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi nodded. It did not matter who went first. Anyway, there seemed to be an endless number of large-toothed rats rushing over. Everyone would have a chance to use their best skills. Seeing that Fan Shouwu was ready, Mu Hongyi immediately shouted to Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong in front of him. "Zhang Yuntao, Lan Jiong, the two of you listen carefully. When we attack later, quickly get down." Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong quickly responded. At the same time, they were overjoyed. If their big brother did not think of a way, they were afraid that they would not be able to hold on for long. There were too many large-toothed rats in front of them. Even if the two brothers were strong in martial arts, they had already been bitten several times by these little things. If this continued, the two brothers might die here. Seeing that Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were ready, Mu Hongyi said to Fan Shouwu, "Let's begin." Fan Shouwu nodded and immediately drew out his cold light sword. At the same time, he began to silently use his internal breath. When his internal strength was raised to the maximum, he suddenly shouted at Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong in front of him, "Get down." Zhang Yuntao had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After listening to Fan Shouwu's words, they immediately laid down on the ground without hesitation. Seeing this, Fan Shouwu immediately took 2 steps forward, arriving in front of the two, and shouted, "Stars!" As soon as Fan Shouwu finished speaking, a ball of starlight rose from the cold light sword in his hand. In the blink of an eye, it transformed into a dozen dazzling cold stars in front of him. A moment later, a few cold stars flew into the distant darkness and landed on the charging pack of large-toothed rats. Creak, 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 creak. Following Fan Shouwu's chilling stars, a large number of large-toothed rats began to cry out in pain. Very quickly, a large number of them were cleared out. Although Fan Shouwu's move was quite powerful, his strength was still too low. In the blink of an eye, his ultimate move, vast stars, had disappeared in front of him. When Fan Shouwu saw that his ultimate move had disappeared, he hurriedly retreated a few steps and dodged to the side. Wave arrow. Just as Fan Shouwu retreated to the side of the cliff, Hodaki's wave arrow flew out from the bowstring, bringing with it a strong gust of wind as it rushed towards a large number of large-toothed rats. Next, Shun Feisher, heart-destroying fist. Zhang Qiuming, long rainbow. Mu Hongyi, flowing light. Everyone took turns to use their ultimate moves. At this moment, Zhang Ming realized that none of these people were mediocre. Everyone had their own ultimate moves, and each of their ultimate moves were quite extraordinary. This was an eye-opener for him. Although everyone's ultimate moves were very powerful, there were simply too many of these large-toothed rats. It was almost as if there was no end to them. It was only until everyone's inner energy was depleted that the number of large-toothed rats gradually decreased. At this moment, the tunnel in front of them was almost completely filled with large-toothed rats. If it weren't for their super powerful ultimate moves, this tunnel would have been completely blocked by these large-toothed rats. When Mu Hongyi saw that the number of large-toothed rats was decreasing, he was slightly relieved. He knew that the crisis had passed and hurriedly waved his hand, indicating for everyone to stop. After everyone received the order and saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats rushing towards them, they all let out a long sigh of relief and collapsed on the ground. Just now, everyone took turns to use their ultimate moves. After a long period of using them, their inner energy had long been depleted. If those large-toothed rats hadn't been eliminated, they were afraid that their side would be in danger next. Zhang Ming walked toward the pale-faced Fan Shouwu and sat down in front of him, asking with a smile, "How are you? Are you all right?" At this moment, although Fan Shouwu's face was pale, his expression was filled with joy. With his martial arts, he was actually able to fight side by side with an expert like Mu Hongyi. This was something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. The fierce brothers, Lord Mu, and the others are really powerful. Today, I'm lucky enough to see them use their ultimate moves. It's really admirable. Zhang Ming nodded. Their martial arts are indeed very powerful. However, your martial arts aren't bad either. When Fan Shouwu heard this, he said somewhat embarrassedly, "My martial arts are simply too weak compared to theirs." Just as everyone was talking, Zhang Yuntao, who had been fighting at the front, suddenly shouted loudly, "Big brother, there are no more rats rushing towards us." Mu Hongyi nodded and shouted at Zhang Yuntao, "Since there are no more rats, the two of you should take turns to rest. Don't let your guard down." In this battle, although Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong were the front, the two of them didn't use much energy. After the two of them fought for a while, Muhangi ordered everyone to take turns to use their ultimate moves to attack the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards them. Ever since Fan Shouwu made his move, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong had been lying on the ground without moving. This was because they couldn't move. Everyone was constantly using their ultimate moves to attack the large-toothed rats above them. If they dared to stand up, they would definitely end up like the large-toothed rats. Later on, when Muhangi saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats rushing towards them, he let the two of them clean up the mess. Hodaki looked at the passageway that had returned to normal. After thinking for a while, he turned to look at Muhangi and asked, "Big brother, are we still going forward?" After listening to Hodaki's question, Muhangi didn't hesitate this time and nodded directly. "We can only continue forward. I'm guessing that this is the passageway that leads to the outside. If we don't open up this passageway, it will be terrible if there's danger inside." Chapter 57. Muhangi was right. If they did not open up the exit and continue to go deeper, they would not have a chance to escape with the large-toothed rats blocking their way, even if they wanted to. Hodaki nodded when he heard this. "I didn't expect that there would be such a place besides the Nightmare Eagle." Muhangi was silent for a while before he spoke slowly. "Our current location shouldn't be too far from the entrance. Logically speaking, the further in we go, the more dangerous it will be. However, we almost couldn't deal with these monsters at the entrance. If we continue to go deeper, I'm afraid that there will be more powerful monsters." Hodaki thought for a while and said, "Brother, you should be right. Big brother, what you said should be right. There must be even more powerful monsters inside." Hodaki hesitated for a while before he continued, "I'm thinking, what if we don't go in?" Muhangi was stunned when he heard this. Then he smiled and said, "Aren't you curious about the things inside?" Hodaki shook his head. "This is not a question of curiosity. We almost couldn't deal with the monsters here. If a large number of more powerful monsters appear, we will definitely be injured." Muhangi nodded when he heard this. Hodaki was right. If more powerful monsters appeared, they would definitely be injured. However, should they just retreat like this? Muhangi was not willing to do so. Great benefits were often hidden in great danger. Muhangi was very clear about this. Although Muhangi was a Xiantian master, he felt that he had not made much progress after entering the Xiantian realm and after so many years of cultivation. However, Muhangi was also very clear that it was quite difficult to improve again after entering the Xiantian realm. He was not the only one who felt this feeling of slow progress. All Xiantian masters felt this. If they wanted to break through again, they had to think of a way. Muhangi had once heard people say that the reason why many experts were able to break through was because of some treasures. Muhangi was just a guard captain. It was not easy for him to obtain high-level treasures. Then, was there any treasure in this passage that could help him break through? This was a question that Muhangi had been thinking about. Hodaki saw that his brother did not speak, so he hurriedly asked again, "Big brother, do you really want to go inside?" Muhangi was silent for a long time before he slowly nodded and said seriously, "I do want to take a look inside and see what's inside." Hodaki was a little anxious when he heard that and hurriedly stopped him. "Big brother, you mustn't do that. We don't even know what dangers lie ahead. Furthermore, we have the son of the deputy prefectural governor in our group. If anything happens to Fan Gongzi, we won't be able to bear the consequences. Big brother, you have to reconsider." Muhangi shook his head. "The reason why I want to leave through this passage is because I want to send all of you out and then enter this place alone." When Hodaki heard this, he became even more anxious. "Big brother, how can you do this? It's impossible for you to pass through this passage by yourself." Muhangi looked into the depths of the passage and sighed. "I also know that it may be very dangerous inside, but if I don't try, how can I know what's inside?" Hodaki also sighed. "Big brother, even if it were those rats that we encountered just now, it would be difficult for you to deal with them alone. If there are more dangerous monsters, you won't have a chance to escape. Big brother, no matter what, you have to think carefully." Muhangi looked at Hodaki and patted him on the shoulder with a smile. Second brother, you don't have to worry about me. If I really encounter a powerful monster inside, I think that with my martial arts, even if I can't defeat it, I should be able to escape without a problem. When Hodaki heard this, he wanted to persuade him again, but was stopped by Muhongi. Second brother, I've made up my mind. You don't have to persuade me anymore. I know your good intentions. Although the conversation between Muhongi and Hodaki was not loud, Zhang Meng still heard it clearly. Zhang Meng thought for a moment and turned to look at Fan Shou. He asked with a smile, Fan Gongzi, if you had a choice, would you choose to continue searching for treasures inside? When Fan Shou heard this, he shook his head. It's too dangerous here. The rats we encountered and the bats over there should be the lowest level monsters according to their distribution. However, even these lowest level monsters are quite difficult for me to deal with. If we continue to go in, I'm afraid it will be even more dangerous. I think I still have some self-awareness. When Zhang Meng heard this, he reached out and patted Fan Shou on the shoulder. You're smart. You know it's dangerous, so you don't go. At this point, Zhang Meng lowered his voice and asked, guess if there's anyone here who isn't afraid of the danger and wants to continue going in. Fan Shou thought for a moment and then shook his head. I don't think so. When we were dealing with those rats just now, you saw that everyone used almost all their strength to eliminate those rats. If we encounter more powerful monsters, we will definitely be wiped out. Zhang Meng smiled and shook his head. You're wrong. There must be someone who isn't afraid of the danger and wants to go in and take a look. When Fan Shou heard this, he shook his head. I don't believe it. It's so dangerous here. If we're not careful, we might lose our lives. Who would be so stupid to want to go in and search for treasures? When Zhang Meng heard this, he laughed in his heart. Fan Shou had guessed wrong. At least, Muhongi wanted to go in and take a look. Of course, this included Zhang Meng. Zhang Meng wasn't afraid of any danger here. What he wanted to do the most was to find an experienced person to enter this passage with him and explore inside. Why did he want to find an experienced person? Of course, there was a reason for that. If Zhang Meng entered the passage by himself and beat up the monsters he saw, he was afraid that all the monsters here would be beaten to a pulp by him. However, why did Zhang Meng want to enter this passage? The main reason was to get some gold coins to spend. After all, there were so many people in the village. If there wasn't a large amount of gold coins, the people in the village wouldn't be able to live a good life. The problem was that Zhang Meng didn't know what was valuable. This was very awkward. If Zhang Meng randomly beat all the monsters into a pulp, then all he would gain would be a large pile of meat paste. There wouldn't be anything valuable. Chapter 58. Everyone rested for a while. When Muhongi saw that everyone's strength had recovered, he immediately ordered them to continue moving forward. Along the way, it was still Zhang Yuntao and his brother who led the way. Everyone followed closely behind and moved forward cautiously. Although most of the large-toothed rats had been eliminated, there were still sporadic large-toothed rats that rushed out from the darkness and ambushed everyone. But without exception, they were all killed by Zhang Yuntao and his brother who were leading the way. Everyone was moving forward and exploring when suddenly, Zhang Yuntao, who was leading the way, suddenly shouted, "Big brother, there seems to be a big space in front." Muhongi heard and immediately ordered them to stop moving forward. Then, he let Zhang Yuntao go forward alone to check out the situation. Zhang Yuntao responded and walked forward with the steel saber in his hand. Zhang Yuntao walked very carefully, afraid that he would attract some monsters to rush over. Not long after, Zhang Yuntao walked to the big space that he had seen earlier. In the dark tunnel, the reason why Zhang Yuntao could see the large space was that there was more red in the large space. Therefore, he could see more clearly in the dark. He could see a large area of faint red from afar. Zhang Yuntao looked at the big space not far away and stopped to listen carefully. Then, he couldn't help but frown. Looking at the big space from where he was, although he didn't see any danger, he could hear a familiar sound. Squeak, squeak. Although there weren't many of these sounds, Zhang Yuntao couldn't guarantee that there weren't many large-toothed rats in this big space. Zhang Yuntao took a deep breath and held his breath. He slowed down his footsteps and walked towards the tunnel of the big space. Along the way, Zhang Yuntao's footsteps were very light and didn't cause too much of a disturbance. Even the familiar sounds from the big space didn't change much. Zhang Yuntao was slightly relieved when he felt that he didn't disturb the monsters in the big space. When he reached the tunnel of the big space, he stopped again and slowly exhaled. Then, he took another slow breath and held the steel sword in his hand tightly. He looked into the big space. This large space was similar to the large space filled with bats. However, there weren't many monsters in this space. Zhang Yuntao only saw a small number of megalodon rats on the ground grinding their teeth. Zhang Yuntao carefully observed the space and found that there were two passages on the opposite side. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Could it be that one of the passages leads to the outside? After observing for a while, Zhang Yuntao slowly retracted his head and turned around to return the way he came. After listening to Zhang Yuntao's explanation, Mu Hongyi pondered in his heart. It seems that the big space was where these big rats lived. He had just eliminated all the big rats, so there weren't many of them left in this space. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi turned to look at the crowd and said in a low voice, "Ahead should be the gathering place of the big rats. However, we have already eliminated most of the big rats. There should only be a small number of rats left. Wait a moment, brothers. Let's work harder and try to eliminate all the remaining big rats." After a while, Mu Hongyi saw that everyone understood what he meant, so he immediately waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Brothers, let's set off now to eliminate those big rats." When the crowd heard this, they all stood up, took out their weapons, and followed behind Mu Hongyi. Soon, Mu Hongyi led everyone to the passage of the large space. He first waved his hand to signal everyone to stop. Then, he personally went forward to observe the large space. Seeing that the situation in the large space was no different from what Zhang Yuntao had said, he turned around and said to everyone in a low voice, "There aren't many big rats left in there. Everyone get ready. We will rush in now and try to eliminate all of them." Hearing this, everyone nodded. Mu Hongyi turned his head to look at everyone again. He looked at the large space again and saw that there were no changes. Then he shouted, "Brothers, let's rush in and eliminate these hateful big rats." As he spoke, Mu Hongyi took the lead and rushed into the large space. Seeing this, everyone didn't dare to be negligent. They all picked up their weapons and rushed into the large space. Even though these large-toothed rats had grown bigger, they were still vigilant. Mu Hongyi's shout was heard by all of the large-toothed rats. Seeing that an outsider had intruded into their territory, the large-toothed rats were enraged. They stood up quickly and rushed in the direction of the voice. At this moment, the large space, which was initially quiet, suddenly became noisy. Squeak, 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 squeak. Countless large-toothed rats ran out from all directions. Originally, there weren't many large-toothed rats on the ground. But after Mu Hongyi's shout, countless shadows of large-toothed rats appeared from the ground. They squeaked and rushed in this direction. Looking at the large group of large-toothed rats rushing over, Mu Hongyi regretted it. He was a little careless. Initially, he saw that there weren't many large-toothed rats left on the ground in the large space. That was why he wanted his brothers to rush into the large space and wipe out the remaining large-toothed rats. This would save them a lot of time, but he didn't expect that there would be so many large-toothed rats. Mu Hongyi looked at them for a long time, but he still couldn't figure out where these large-toothed rats came from. But now that things had come to this, regret wouldn't solve the problem. Looking at the large group of large-toothed rats rushing towards him, Mu Hongyi immediately waved the bright ray sword in his hand and shouted, "Flowing light." Facing such a large number of large-toothed rats, Mu Hongyi knew clearly that normal sword skills wouldn't be able to solve the problem. Now he could only rely on his ultimate move to deal with these despicable large-toothed rats. Just as Mu Hongyi's voice fell, the bright ray sword in his hand turned into a bright sword light. Like a waterfall flowing down from a mountain, it landed on the ground and created thousands of ripples. After the ripples spread out, it landed on the group of large-toothed rats that were rushing over. The large-toothed rats that were hit by the ripples were immediately smashed into pieces. Countless large-toothed rats cried out at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the large-toothed rats in front of Mu Hongyi were all cleared. What was left were only fragments of the large-toothed rats. Zhang Meng didn't participate in the battle. He felt that although there were many large-toothed rats here, Mu Hongyi and the others were definitely not to be trifled with. Each of them had strong martial arts skills. Dealing with these large-toothed rats shouldn't be a problem. Chapter 59. Mu Hongyi used his ultimate move and instantly wiped out all the large-toothed rats within 5 meters in front of him. Everyone saw that their boss had already used his ultimate move and did not dare to be negligent. They hurriedly stood in a position where they would not affect the others and began to use their ultimate moves on the large-toothed rats that were rushing over. For a moment, the big space was filled with flashes of brilliance, and the screams of the large-toothed rats could be heard everywhere. Although everyone's martial arts were powerful, there were too many large-toothed rats. Mu Hongyi had just used his ultimate move to wipe out all the large-toothed rats in front of him. Just as he was about to catch his breath, he suddenly saw a large number of large-toothed rats rushing over. Helpless, Mu Hongyi could only wave the bright ray sword in his hand again and roar. Flowing light. Mu Hongyi continuously used his ultimate move to attack the large-toothed rats that were rushing over. The rest of his brothers were no exception. They were all continuously using their ultimate moves. In the face of such a large number of large-toothed rats, ordinary sword techniques could no longer block the attacks of these large-toothed rats. Now, they could only continuously use their ultimate moves to prevent these large-toothed rats from attacking them. Mu Hongyi used his ultimate move 3 times in a row. When he saw that the number of large-toothed rats rushing over in front of him had not decreased, he felt even more regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would not have rushed in so rashly. Actually, Mu Hongyi could not be blamed for underestimating the enemy. They had already eliminated countless large-toothed rats in the passageway and thought that there were not many large-toothed rats left. Who would have thought that there were still so many large-toothed rats here? Mu Hongyi was holding a sharp sword, and attacking these large-toothed rats that were rushing over was still manageable. Among this group of people, the ones who were fighting the hardest were Ho Daki and Shun Feisher. Ho Daki was a long-range attacker. In terms of long-range attacks, he could be said to be the well-deserved king among these people. However, in the face of such a large number of large-toothed rats, it was really difficult for him to fight. His ultimate move, the oscillating arrow, was also a powerful long-range attack. However, it could not hit the large-toothed rats that were close to him. In desperation, he could only dodge while desperately using the longbow in his hand to smash the large-toothed rats on the ground. However, the longbow was not used like this. Its purpose was to attack the enemy from a distance. It was not very powerful to smash it like a hammer. Most importantly, it was not that sturdy. Although the longbow in Ho Daki's hand was made by him at a high price, it still couldn't be compared to the hammer. As soon as Ho Daki activated his ultimate skill, he was shocked to find that many of the rats had already broken through the seal of his ultimate skill and were charging toward him. In desperation, Ho Daki could only circulate his internal energy and wave the longbow in his hand, sweeping it in front of him. With Ho Daki's inner energy, even if he was holding a wooden stick, as long as he channeled enough inner energy, he could still wipe out all the large-toothed rats in front of him. Ho Daki waved the longbow in his hand and swept it in front of him. Countless megalodon rats were sent flying by the longbow in his hand. They screamed and fell to the ground, motionless. Although Ho Daki's attack was ferocious, more and more large-toothed rats rushed over as soon as he wiped out the large-toothed rats in front of him. Left with no choice, Ho Daki could only circulate his inner energy and wave the longbow in his hand with all his might, sending the large-toothed rats flying one by one. Relying on his profound inner energy, Ho Daki could hold on for a long time, but the longbow in his hand couldn't hold on for that long. Hodaki didn't fight for long like this before he suddenly heard the sound of a bowstring breaking. He cursed in his heart and hurriedly put away the longbow to check it. With just one look, Hodaki was about to fly into a rage. The quality of a longbow all depended on the bowstring. The bowstring that he spent a lot of money to buy was actually broken. Hodaki was so angry that he screamed. Since the bowstring was already broken, there was no need for him to stay back. He gathered all his inner energy and used the longbow in his hand as an iron rod, desperately attacking the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. However, without the support of his ultimate skill, it was still quite difficult to rely on this kind of attack to block the large-toothed rats. Not long after, Hodaki was bitten a few times by the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. He was in so much pain that he screamed, but he didn't dare to stop. He could only wave the longbow even harder to block the large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. Although Hodaki was fighting very miserably, he was still not the most miserable person. In this battle, the most miserable person should be Shinfei. Shinfei was a close combat fighter. Logically speaking, he should be the best at dealing with these large-toothed rats that were charging toward him. However, in reality, this was not the case. Green of the Fierce Wind Mercenary Group once said that the most terrifying thing about these large-toothed rats was their eating speed. As long as these large-toothed rats rushed toward you, they would immediately eat your body as fast as lightning. Even if you immediately beat them in a minced meat, they would still eat a lot of your things. Shinfei didn't realize this at first and was still full of confidence. However, not long after, he felt that something was wrong. Shinfei had just launched his ultimate skill, the heart-destroying fist, when he immediately realized that a few large-toothed rats had broken through his defense and were charging toward him. Seeing these large-toothed rats charging toward him, Shinfei didn't care at all. He immediately crossed his fists and struck out at the same time, hitting two of the large-toothed rats' heads and sending them flying. There were not only two large-toothed rats charging toward Shinfei, there were a total of 5 of them. After Shinfei sent 2 large-toothed rats flying, he immediately waved his fists and hit the other 2 large-toothed rats, sending them flying. Although Shinfei had sent 4 large-toothed rats flying in a row, there was still 1 large-toothed rat that broke through Shinfei's fist wind and continued to charge toward him. Seeing this, Shinfei didn't care at all. He was a close combat fighter and naturally had a good understanding of close combat. After so many years of training, he could almost use every part of his body as a weapon. Seeing this large-toothed rat break through his defense and charge toward him, Shinfei sneered. He lowered his arms slightly, and his elbow struck the large-toothed rat that was charging toward him. Shinfei's timing was very accurate. His elbow accurately hit the large-toothed rat's head, as if he had been waiting for this large-toothed rat to charge toward him. Squeak-ah! The large-toothed rat was hit in the head by Shinfei's elbow. It immediately screamed and fell to the ground. But at the same time, Shinfei also felt a piercing pain coming from his elbow. He immediately screamed in pain and hurriedly retracted his arm. He saw that a large chunk of his elbow had been bitten by the large-toothed rat. Seeing this, Shinfei was shocked and angry. He didn't think that these hateful large-toothed rats would turn around and bite him when he hit them. Chapter 60. After Shinfei sent the large-toothed rat flying, he was bitten by the large-toothed rat himself. He immediately screamed in pain. Although he was in great pain, the large-toothed rats did not care whether he was in pain or not. They still rushed toward him crazily, wanting to give him more food. Seeing this, Shinfei could only endure the pain and use his ultimate skill again to wipe out the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. However, there were too many large-toothed rats. Although his ultimate skill was very powerful, he still could not wipe out all the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. Looking at the large-toothed rats that had broken through his ultimate skill and rushed toward him, Shinfei felt a chill in his heart. He subconsciously wanted to block them with his fist, but the pain on his elbow made him retract his fist. Although he did not want to fight these large-toothed rats with his bare hands, these large-toothed rats refused to let him go and continued to rush toward him without regard for their lives. In desperation, Shunfeisher could only lift his leg and sweep it across, kicking away a few of the large-toothed rats that were rushing toward him. After kicking out, Shunfeisher did not feel any pain from his leg. He was overjoyed. He knew that his leg was covered by his clothes, and those large-toothed rats could not bite him. Thinking of this, Shunfeisher immediately regained his confidence. Even if he did not use his fists and only relied on his feet, he was still not afraid of these large-toothed rats. After all, he was a melee fighter with rich combat experience. However, after a few rounds of fighting, Shunfeisher suddenly realized that his clothes had been bitten off by those abominable large-toothed rats. Seeing this situation, Shunfeisher was so angry that his eyes were about to burst, but there was nothing he could do. He could only grit his teeth and continue fighting. Mu Hongyi and his brothers unleashed their invincible might and exterminated many large-toothed rats. However, there were simply too many large-toothed rats. Although they exterminated many large-toothed rats, there were still many large-toothed rats that broke through their defensive line and bit them. Hearing his brothers' continuous screams, Mu Hongyi was secretly anxious. He was so anxious that his mind was racing. He wanted to think of a way to change this situation. While Mu Hongyi was in a daze, a large-toothed rat had already broken through his defense line and bit him. Being bitten by a large-toothed rat was an absolutely terrifying thing. Mu Hongyi only felt pain on his body and subconsciously let out a scream. Although he quickly killed a rat, he still lost a lot of things. Compared to Mu Hongyi and his brothers, Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming, and the others were much better off. Mu Hongyi and his brothers blocked most of the large-toothed rats in front. Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming only needed to deal with a small number of large-toothed rats running from the side. This way, they had to deal with fewer large-toothed rats. However, their martial arts were much weaker than Mu Hongyi and the others. Therefore, although they had to face fewer large-toothed rats, they were still flustered and in danger. Compared to Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu's ultimate skill, Myriad Stars, could be considered an ultimate skill that could be used for both offense and defense. It could be used for both long-range and close-range attacks, so it could be used to deal with these large-toothed rats. However, Zhang Qiuming was a little weak. His ultimate skill, Long Rainbow, was to use the three-section spear in his hands to pierce out tens of meters, clearing out all the enemies in a straight line in front of him. It was quite powerful. However, against these tide-like large-toothed rats, clearing out all the enemies in a straight line in front of him was not enough. Although the battle had not been going on for long, Zhang Qiuming was already sweating profusely. Seeing that there were more and more large-toothed rats in front of him, Zhang Qiuming's eyes turned cold, and he immediately let out a shout. Long Rainbow! Following his words, the three-section spear in his hands turned into a long rainbow and pierced forward like a waterfall. Creak, creak. The three-section spear pierced through tens of large-toothed rats in a row before stopping. Seeing that the three-section spear had lost its momentum, Zhang Qiuming hurriedly shook his hands, and the three-section spear was quickly retracted. However, at this moment, tens of large-toothed rats had already rushed towards him from both sides. Seeing this, Zhang Qiuming was almost scared out of his wits. He hurriedly waved the three-section spear in his hands and swept it away, but it was too late with his speed. When Zhang Qiuming's three-section spear was halfway through sweeping, a few large-toothed rats had already rushed to his side. Zhang Qiuming knew that things were not going well, but there was nothing he could do. Just as he was about to wave his fist to block them, he saw a shadow flash by his side. Old Luo had already rushed up with his saber and blocked his side. The large-toothed rats themselves were not strong, but their terrifying part was their numbers. Like a tidal wave of large-toothed rats, no matter who they attacked, they would not be able to gain any advantage. Old Luo's steel saber slashed violently in front of him, and very soon, a few large-toothed rats had been eliminated. Zhang Qiuming saw that the danger on his side had been resolved, and only then did he feel slightly relieved. He could only say loudly, "Thank you very much." However, old Luo said with a serious expression, "Pay attention to the front." After Fan Shouwu used his ultimate skill, Stars, to sweep away all the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards him, he saw that there were more and more large-toothed rats rushing towards him from both sides. He thought for a moment and immediately shouted at Zhang Qiuming, "Everyone, gather around. Let's form a circle." When everyone heard this, they immediately understood and hurriedly retreated to Fan Shouwu's side. Everyone quickly stood side by side and formed the smallest circle. Of course, Mu Hongyi and the other four brothers were naturally not in this circle, as they were still fighting in front. This defensive circle was mainly formed by Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu, and the guards that they had brought. There was a total of 8 people in the circle. After everyone formed this defensive circle, in addition to the fact that there were not many large-toothed rats rushing towards them from behind, for a moment, they were evenly matched with the large-toothed rats that were rushing towards them. Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming, and the others stabilized their formation and formed a defensive circle, which made them much safer. The large-toothed rats' attack mainly relied on their numbers. They rushed in from all directions, and while you could block the front, you could not block the sides. If this went on, the large-toothed rats would sooner or later find your weakness and rush over. Everyone formed a defensive circle and only needed to face the enemies in front of them. The large-toothed rats on the sides would naturally be dealt with by the people on the sides. Zhang Ming hid at the entrance of the tunnel and carefully observed the situation in the large space. After looking for a while, he found out where the large-toothed rats came from. In this large space, other than the tunnel on the opposite side, there were 2 more tunnels on the side of the tunnel that Zhang Ming was standing on. These large numbers of large-toothed rats rushed out from these 2 tunnels. He did not know where they had been hiding before, but until now, Zhang Ming still saw many large-toothed rats rushing out from the tunnels. Chapter 61. Facing the endless large-toothed rats, Mu Hongyi was so regretful that his intestines turned green. Among these people, his martial arts were the highest. After entering this large space, although it had not been long, he had already used his ultimate skill 5 times in a row. Even if his inner strength was deep, he felt that he could not hold on any longer. Feeling that his inner strength was almost exhausted, Mu Hongyi could not help but look at the rest of his brothers. After seeing the situation of his brothers clearly, he was shocked. His 4 brothers were all pale and had injuries on their bodies. It seemed that they were all struggling to hold on. However, he was afraid that they would not be able to hold on for much longer. Mu Hongyi turned his head and saw the defensive circle formed by Fan Shouwu, Zhang Qiuming, and the others. His heart moved, and he suddenly shouted, "All of you come over here. We will also form a defensive circle and fight side by side." Hodaki and the others were already suffering from the battle. After hearing their big brother shout, they immediately leaned over to him without hesitation. Although there were many large-toothed rats rushing over, under the full force of the 5 people, they still walked together and formed a defensive circle. However, there were only 4 of them fighting side by side on the periphery. Shun Feisher was already surrounded by the 4 people in the middle and could only catch his breath temporarily. Shun Feisher could not continue fighting. He was already injured all over. Whether it was his arms or legs, they were all bitten beyond recognition by the large-toothed rats. If he continued fighting, he was afraid that he would be bitten by these large-toothed rats until he became a skeleton. After Mu Hongyi and the others formed a defensive circle, the pressure on them decreased slightly. Even if they did not use their ultimate skills, they could still hold on for a while. Seeing that everyone was fighting so hard, Zhang Ming hesitated whether he should help them. If he did not help them, they would not be able to withstand the attacks of the large-toothed rats when they were exhausted. However, if he helped them, would it affect anything? After thinking for a while, Zhang Ming sighed helplessly. Since it was like this, he would help them. Thinking of this, Zhang Ming lightly punched the passage where the large-toothed rats were constantly pouring out. Just as Mu Hongyi was feeling a little desperate, he suddenly heard a loud noise. He looked over with the help of the dim red light and saw that the two passages in front of him had collapsed for no reason. The falling boulders had blocked the two passages. Seeing this situation, Mu Hongyi was immediately overjoyed. He knew that he was saved this time. After the battle, just now, he had already seen that the reason why there were so many large-toothed rats in this large space was because a large number of large-toothed rats were constantly swarming out of the tunnel. Now, that the two tunnels had collapsed for no reason, it meant that there were no more reinforcements coming from the large-toothed rats. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi suddenly became spirited. He once again unleashed a consummate skill. After wiping out all the large-toothed rats in front of him, he shouted loudly, "Brothers, as long as we eliminate all the megalodon rats in this space, we will win." In fact, even if Mu Hongyi did not shout this, everyone understood after hearing the loud noise. Although there were many large-toothed rats in front of them, they would eventually be killed off. As long as these hateful large-toothed rats did not have any reinforcements, everything would be fine. After the tunnels collapsed, everyone's spirits were lifted. Then, they began to cheer loudly. Although there were no more reinforcements from the large-toothed rats, there were still many of them. This battle went on for a long time before they were finally wiped out. Seeing that there were no longer any living large-toothed rats in the large space, everyone could not hold on any longer. They immediately found a slightly cleaner place and sat on the ground, panting heavily. Ho Daki rested for a moment, then immediately took out the rest of the medicine. He quickly walked in front of Shun Feisher and said anxiously, "Old Five, let me treat your wounds." Hearing this, Shun Feisher was stunned. He looked at Ho Daki in front of him and felt a little uncomfortable. In this battle, everyone was injured, and Ho Daki was no exception. Although he had the bow with the broken string as a weapon, close combat was not his strength. Now, there were at least 5 or 6 wounds on his body. However, Ho Daki did not treat his own wounds first. Instead, he treated his own wounds first. Shun Feisher felt very uncomfortable. He looked at Ho Daki, who was full of concern, and said in a low voice, "I'm fine. You should treat your own wounds first." Ho Daki shook his head. "Old Five, don't say any more. My wounds are fine. Your wounds are the most serious. Let me treat them for you first." As he spoke, Ho Daki had already begun to treat Shun Feisher's wounds. Seeing Ho Daki treating his own wounds, Shun Feisher felt his eyes become moist. He suddenly understood. Brothers were brothers. There was no need for rankings. If everyone respected you, even if you were the lowest ranking, everyone would still respect you. If everyone did not respect you, even if you were the big brother, no one would truly respect you. Thinking of this, Shun Feisher suddenly said, "Second brother, thank you." Ho Daki, who was treating Shun Feisher's wounds, heard this and said with a smile, "Old Five, we're all brothers. There's no need to be so polite." Hearing this, Shun Feisher nodded heavily. "Second brother, I understand." After saying this, Shun Feisher thought to himself, "Second brother, I really understand." After Ho Daki finished treating Shun Feisher's wounds, he took the medicine and went to Zhang Yuntao and his brother to treat their wounds. Finally, he went to Mu Hongyi. "Big brother, let me treat your wounds too." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi shook his head. "Second brother, it's okay. My wounds are not serious. Come, let me treat your wounds." Seeing that Mu Hongyi's wounds were not serious, Ho Daki nodded and handed over the medicine. Mu Hongyi took the medicine and began to treat Ho Daki's wounds. "Second brother, why do you think the two passages suddenly collapsed?" Ho Daki looked at the passage in front of him that was tightly covered and shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe it was too old, and so many big rats rushed over and knocked down a rock." When Mu Hongyi heard this, he shook his head. "I don't think so. If the big mouse knocked down that rock, why did it knock down the rocks at the two entrances at the same time? This is a little puzzling." Hearing this, Hodaki was stunned and asked hesitantly, "Big brother, are you saying that someone helped us?" Muhangi shook his head. "I don't know. According to this situation, someone should have helped us. But in this space, we don't see any outsiders." Chapter 62. After Muhangi finished treating Hodaki's wound, he walked towards the sealed passage. Before he reached the entrance of the passage, Muhangi heard a squeaking sound coming from the passage. Hearing these sounds, Muhangi's heart suddenly turned cold. Even if his martial arts were strong, after the battle just now, he did not dare to underestimate these weak, large-toothed rats. Hodaki also walked over at this time. Hearing the sounds coming from the passage, he could not help but say, "Big brother, if these two boulders don't block the passage, I'm afraid we'll be in danger." Muhangi nodded silently. The sounds of the large-toothed rats coming from the passage were not only mournful, but there were also many of them. If these large-toothed rats really continued to rush into the space, then the consequences would be really unimaginable. Muhangi checked the situation of the two holes being covered, but he did not find any possibility of it being man-made. He could not help but feel even more puzzled. Could it be that it was really like what Hodaki said, that these rocks had collapsed naturally because it had been here for too long? Could there be such a coincidence? Hodaki walked behind Muhangi and looked at the passage sealed by the rocks. He could not help but say, "Big brother, it looks like it really wasn't man-made. It should have collapsed naturally." Muhangi nodded. Although he did not dare to believe that there could be such a coincidence in the world, the facts were right in front of him, and he had no choice but to believe it. "It looks like it's true," Hodaki said. "Big brother, our luck is really good. Such a coincidence actually happened at this critical moment. It's really a joyous occasion." The voices of the two men spread into the passage and caused countless large-toothed rats to squeak in the passage. Because there were too many squeaks, in the end, they were buzzing like flies. Fan Shouwu, who was almost drenched in sweat, saw Zhang Ming walking over and said with a laugh, "The fierce brothers, this battle was really enjoyable. I've never experienced such an enjoyable battle since I was young." Zhang Ming smiled when he heard this. "Do you want to have such an enjoyable battle again?" Hearing this, Fan Shouwu shook his head with a bitter smile. "No, I really don't want to have this kind of battle again. It's too dangerous." At this point, Fan Shouwu pointed at the collapsed tunnel in the distance and lamented, "If those two tunnels hadn't suddenly collapsed, I feel like I wouldn't have been able to hold on." Zhang Qiuming, who was sitting beside him, also nodded helplessly. That is indeed the case. If the two tunnels had not collapsed and sealed off the large-toothed rats that rushed out, I'm afraid that we would not have been able to leave today. Fan Shouwu nodded. "It's too dangerous. To be honest, I don't have much internal energy left. If the two tunnels don't collapse soon, I'm afraid." "Huh." Zhang Qiuming wiped the sweat off his face and turned to look at old Luo. He smiled and said, "I still have to thank you for just now. If it weren't for your help, those large-toothed rats would have eaten me up long ago." Old Luo shook his head. "If it weren't for Prince Zhang fighting at the front, with just a few of us, I'm afraid that we wouldn't have been able to stop so many large-toothed rats." While the few of them were joking around, Zhang Qiuming suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Guess what Captain Mu will do next?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "I don't know. However, I think that Lord Mu will bring us out of such a dangerous place." Zhang Qiuming shook his head and said in a low voice, "I don't think so. I heard their conversation just now. It seems that Lord Mu said that no matter what, he has to go in and take a look to see what's inside." Fan Shouwu heard this and shook his head. "I don't think so. To be honest, we should be in the outer area now. Think about it. The monsters in the outer area of the tunnel are already so powerful. How powerful would the monsters be inside?" At this point, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before he continued. "Although Sir Mu's martial arts is powerful, I feel that after seeing these large-toothed rats, I'm afraid that he has given up on the idea of going in again." Zhang Qiuming shook his head. "Who knows? However, I'm guessing that Lord Mu will still go in." Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming were discussing this matter. Mu Hongyi and Ho Daki were also discussing this issue. Ho Daki said, "Big brother, don't tell me you want to go in and take a look this time." Mu Hongyi heard this and looked at the large-toothed rats all over the ground. He was a little hesitant. If they went on, they might really be in danger. Not to mention other dangers. As long as the large-toothed rats in the tunnel were released, they would definitely not be able to get out alive. However, Mu Hongyi felt a little unwilling to give up this opportunity just like that. What should they do? Ho Daki looked at the hesitant Mu Hongyi and thought for a moment before speaking. "Big brother, if you really want to go in and take a look, we can only wait. Let's send someone back to report to the Grand Commander and ask him to send more people to support us. I think that after the Grand Commander knows about this, he will definitely ask the elders to come forward. At that time, with the help of the elders, we shouldn't be in too much danger. Big brother, I think this is the best choice. If you go into the tunnel yourself, I'm afraid that you will be in danger." Mu Hongyi was silent for a long time when he heard this. Then, he nodded slightly and said with a sigh, "Since things have come to this, we can only do this." Speaking of this, Mu Hongyi glanced at the sealed tunnel again and said slowly, "We should think of a way to get out now. When we get out of the tunnel, we will immediately send someone back to report to the commander and let him make a decision." Ho Daki was overjoyed when he heard this. "Big brother, since this is the case, let's quickly think of a way to get out." Mu Hongyi nodded and walked toward the crowd. Zhang Yuntao saw his big brother coming over and quickly stood up to welcome him. "Big brother, how is the tunnel? What exactly caused it to collapse?" Mu Hongyi shook his head, then patted Zhang Yuntao's shoulder and said with a smile, "It seems that it was because we were lucky that the two tunnels collapsed at the critical moment." Zhang Yuntao nodded when he heard this. Although he didn't say anything, he didn't believe that the two tunnels collapsed at the critical moment because they were lucky. Even if they were lucky, it would be amazing if only one tunnel collapsed. How could both tunnels collapse? There must be a problem. However, since his big brother didn't want to talk about it, Zhang Yuntao naturally wouldn't talk about it. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Big brother, what should we do next? Should we continue to move forward or find a way to get out?" Chapter 63. When Mu Hongyi heard this, he sighed and said slowly, "That's right. The monsters here are not something we can deal with. Now we can only retreat first, pass this news back, and wait for the commander's decision." Zhang Yuntao nodded. This was also the best choice. If they continued to rush blindly, they might be completely wiped out. This was definitely not an alarmist talk. Just like in the battle just now, if the two passages had not been sealed, then the only outcome would have been a complete wipeout. Since they had decided to retreat, they had to think of a way to do so. Mu Hongyi glanced at the situation in the big space and wanted to see which passage to take. The two passages behind them had been sealed by boulders. If they wanted to leave, they could only take the two passages opposite them. But where did those two passages lead to? No one knew. What would be in these two passages? No one knew either. After observing for a long time, he could not see which passage led to the outside world. Mu Hongyi hesitated again. He really just wanted to go out now. He just wanted to bring everyone out alive. If he wanted to go in and explore again, then that was his own business. Seeing his big brother hesitate, Zhang Yuntao suddenly spoke up. "Big brother, I think it's better if we give up the two passages in front and go back the way we came. What do you think?" Ho Daki heard this and also said, "Yes, big brother, we don't know what monsters are in the two passages in front. I think if we go back the way we came, although the journey will be a little longer, at least it will be safe." After listening to the words of his two brothers, Mu Hongyi pondered for a while before nodding. "Well then, let's go back the way we came." Since they had decided to go back the way they came, everyone did not delay any longer. They immediately stood up and walked back the way they came. The people in front of them were still the two brothers, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiao. Everyone had already walked this path once. Relatively speaking, they were already very familiar with it. Moreover, there were no forks in this path. They just had to keep moving forward. Everyone had stayed in this dangerous place for long enough. They just wanted to get out as soon as possible. Naturally, Their pace was much faster. Everyone moved forward. After losing the battle, they were not in the mood to talk. They just moved forward silently, wanting to get out of this dark passage as soon as possible. Although everyone could let their imaginations run wild, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong, who were walking at the front, did not dare to do so. The two of them were tasked with exploring the path. Naturally, they did not dare to be careless. Along the way, they held steel knives in their hands and carefully explored the path in front of them. They did not dare to have the slightest carelessness. Just when everyone was in a hurry, Zhang Yuntao suddenly stopped. At the same time, he waved his hand behind him, indicating for everyone to stop. When the crowd saw Zhang Yuntao wave his hand, they were all shocked. They hurriedly stopped in their tracks. Just as they were about to ask, they saw Zhang Yuntao in front of them make a shushing gesture. Everyone was even more shocked. They hurriedly listened to the voice in front of them. Piak, 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 piak. When everyone heard this familiar voice, they were shocked. Big bat. Judging from the source of the sound, there seemed to be a lot of big bats. When Mu Hongyi heard this voice, he was a little confused. There were no giant bats along the way, so why would there be such a sound now? Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi suddenly remembered what had happened in the large space with the large-toothed rats. Originally, there were not many large-toothed rats in the large space. However, when everyone rushed in, countless large-toothed rats came out of the passage. Could it be that the situation in the large space with the giant bats was the same? If that was really the case, it would be terrible. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi hurriedly walked forward to Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong and said in a low voice, "Come, follow me to the front to take a look." When Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong heard this, they nodded and followed Mu Hongyi forward. After walking for a while, the slapping sound became louder. Mu Hongyi's face was a little pale. He felt that what he had guessed just now might be true. The three of them walked carefully, not daring to make any sound. Even their breathing was suppressed as much as possible for fear of alarming the giant bats in front of them. Hearing the slapping sound in front of them getting louder and more frequent, Mu Hongyi suddenly waved his hand at Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong behind him and pointed to the back. Then, he carefully walked back the way he came. When Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong saw that their big brother had retreated, they did not dare to delay and hurriedly followed Mu Hongyi's footsteps. They walked all the way back and finally returned to their original position. When Ho Daki saw that Mu Hongyi had returned, he hurriedly went forward to greet him. Just as he was about to ask, he saw Mu Hongyi waving his hand vigorously at him and making a gesture to keep quiet. He could not help but feel a little strange, but he did not dare to ask again. Mu Hongyi walked in front of everyone, stretched out his arm, and waved at everyone. Then, he took the lead and walked back the way he came. When everyone saw Mu Hongyi's cautious look, they knew that the situation was not good. At this time, no one dared to speak. Seeing that Mu Hongyi had retreated, they hurriedly followed behind him and walked back the way they came. Everyone walked quickly and soon returned to the large space with the large-toothed rats. At this time, the large-toothed rats inside were sealed and could not come out. Therefore, there were no large-toothed rats in the large space. Seeing this situation, Mu Hongyi was slightly relieved. He turned his head to look at everyone and said in a low voice, "We can't go back the way we came. Although I didn't walk into that space, I felt that there must be a lot of bats over there from the sounds made by those large bats. If we go from there, we might encounter the same danger as here. That's why I brought everyone back here. At least it's safer here. Let's discuss a plan here and then decide which way to go." When everyone heard this, they finally understood why Mu Hongyi had quietly brought them back. When Shen Feisher heard Mu Hongyi's words, he was shocked. Others did not know how powerful the bat space was, but he had seen it with his own eyes. The large bat swarm that covered the sky almost filled the large space. If those countless large bats rushed toward everyone, Shen Feisher could be sure that no one would be able to escape if this situation really happened. Although the large-toothed rats were terrifying, the large-toothed rats ran on the ground after all. Their attacks could still be traced. At least they would not leave the ground. However, The attacks of those large bats were different. These large bats could fly, and they flew very fast. When they attacked the enemy, they would attack the enemy from all directions without any blind spots. Chapter 64. Mu Hongyi led everyone back to the space of the large-toothed rats. He looked at the two tunnels in front of him and began to ponder. Which tunnel should he choose? Now, he no longer had the idea of exploring. Mu Hongyi only wanted to find a safe tunnel and return to the outside as soon as possible. There were two tunnels on the opposite side. Mu Hongyi guessed that one of them should lead to the outside. As for the other tunnel, it was hard to say. It might lead to somewhere else. If they went the wrong way, they would definitely encounter monsters. If they encountered a tide of large-toothed rats, it would be terrible. Mu Hongyi did not believe that he would be so lucky as to escape the fangs of the large-toothed rats. Looking at the two tunnels on the opposite side, everyone was hesitant. After these few battles, everyone was very clear that if they went the wrong way, they would definitely encounter a large number of monsters in the tunnel. When that time came, it would be hard to say if they could get out alive. If it was when they had just entered the tunnel, Mu Hongyi would definitely have the ability to make a decisive decision. However, after this battle, Mu Hongyi had become less decisive. He knew that his decision would directly determine everyone's life and death. If they chose the wrong tunnel in front of them, the chances of getting out alive were really too slim. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi strode to the front of the two tunnels and carefully observed the movements in the tunnels. He wanted to see if he could find any problems. However, unfortunately, the two tunnels were basically the same. It was almost impossible to find any problems from the outside. Mu Hongyi once again fell into hesitation. He was afraid that he would make a mistake in his command and cause everyone to fall into a desperate situation. Everyone was sizing up the two tunnels. After a long while, Dazhai suddenly said, "Big brother, since we have no choice, why don't you let me explore the path in front? After confirming that there is no danger in front, you all can enter the tunnel." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi thought for a while and nodded. "All right then, it's good that you go and take a look. How about this? I'll let Zhang Yuntao go with you. If there is any danger, you can take care of each other." Hearing this, Dazhai knew that now was not the time to be stubborn. He nodded. "All right, big brother, I'll go then." As he spoke, Dazhai had already taken the lead and walked into one of the tunnels. He did not deliberately choose it. He just randomly chose a tunnel and walked in. There was no need to choose. If he knew which passage was the safest, everyone would not hesitate. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly strode forward and chased after him. Dazhai held the broken bow, an arrow in his hand, and walked forward carefully. He did not dare to make too much noise. If there were any remaining large-toothed rats here, they would definitely swarm over after hearing his voice. Fortunately, Dazhai walked for a long time and did not find any megalodon rats. However, he found a new problem. Dazhai stopped and looked at the crossroads in front of him. He was a little puzzled. At this time, Zhang Yuntao also came forward and asked in a low voice, "Second brother, the situation here is not good." Dazhai nodded, but his gaze never left the crossroads in front of him. There were a total of 3 forks, and all of them were the same. Dazhai had already seen this clearly, and it was precisely because of this that Dazhai was a little hesitant. In the end, Dazhai decided to choose the middle tunnel, because, according to the tunnel that they came from, only the middle tunnel could be connected to the tunnel that they came from. Thinking of this, Dazhai turned to look at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, "We will walk in the middle. When we leave later, you must be very careful. I feel that this tunnel is a little different from the one that we were in just now." Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, don't worry." Hearing this, Dazhai raised the broken bow in his hand and walked towards the middle tunnel. The tunnel was very quiet. There was no sound at all. There were only a few droplets of water condensed due to the humidity. They dripped onto the rock surface and made a crisp sound. Looking at the dark tunnel in front of him, although Dazhai could not hear anything, he still felt a sense of danger surrounding him. Hodaki tried his best to open his eyes, wanting to see where this sense of danger came from. Unfortunately, he could not see anything. In front of him, there were only dark gray rocks. Other than rocks, there was nothing else. This invisible pressure was even more terrifying than a head-on battle. After walking for a short distance, Hodaki felt uncomfortably hot. He wiped the sweat on his forehead. It was also at this moment that he suddenly heard a weak sound. Goo-goo. The sound was very soft, but in the silent tunnel, Hodaki could still hear it clearly. What is this sound? Hodaki was a little puzzled. This sound was definitely not made by the big rats or the big bats. Then what could it be? Although there was a sound in front of him, which proved that there was definitely a monster ahead, Hodaki was just a scout. If he only heard the sound and retreated, it would be a little too disgraceful. Hodaki took a deep breath, lightened his footsteps, and walked forward. After walking for a while, Hodaki felt that there were more sounds coming from inside. It was also at this moment that Hodaki suddenly realized that there were forks on both sides of the tunnel in front of him. When Hodaki saw the forks on both sides of the tunnel, he became even more nervous. He grabbed the bow with a broken string and carefully walked towards the fork in front of him. Just as Hodaki was about to enter the fork, he suddenly felt a gust of wind in front of him. The sound of the wind came so fast that it gave Hodaki a fright. He hurriedly used all his strength to stand up and lean back. It was at this moment that something that looked like a long whip shot out from where his body was originally standing. Very quickly, it retracted back into the dark fork. Seeing this change, more cold sweat flowed down Hodaki's forehead. He hurriedly took a few steps back and avoided the fork. At the same time, he raised the bow with a broken string in his hand and made a defensive posture. Zhang Yuntao saw that the situation was bad and hurriedly walked to Hodaki's side. He raised the saber in his hand in front of him and looked ahead vigilantly. The two of them were in a defensive posture, afraid that countless monsters would rush out from the darkness. However, the two of them waited for a long time, but no monsters rushed out from the darkness. Hodaki glanced at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, "I'll go ahead and take a look. Wait for me here." Zhang Yuntao nodded. At the same time, he gripped the saber even harder. Although Zhang Yuntao was behind, his task was also very difficult. If Hodaki encountered danger in front, he would have to rely on him to save him. Chapter 65. Hodaki carefully walked towards the fork in the passage. He didn't dare to be careless. Who knew what kind of monster was hiding in the dark fork? Hodaki stared straight ahead, afraid that the monster would suddenly attack again. Just as Hodaki approached the fork in the road, another black shadow flew towards him like a bolt of lightning. Hodaki didn't know what was flying towards him, so he naturally didn't dare to take it head on. He hurriedly retreated and dodged the attack. Hodaki saw that he had dodged the sneak attack in the dark. Just as he was about to move forward to check again, he suddenly heard a sizzling sound coming from his side. Hodaki was shocked and hurriedly turned his head to look. He was shocked to find that a ball of green mucus was sticking to the rock next to him. This ball of green mucus was constantly corroding the rock. The sizzling sound was the sound of the mucus corroding the rock. Seeing this scene, Hodaki was so shocked that his scalp went numb. He was secretly afraid. If he had been hit by this ball of mucus, Hodaki didn't believe that he would be stronger than a rock. After a short while, the corroded rock stopped making any noise. Only a large dent was left where the mucus had hit. Hodaki wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He felt that his palms were cold. He subconsciously took a few steps back and returned to Zhang Yuntao's side. He lowered his voice and said, "Be careful. Be careful later. Don't get sprayed by that thing." Zhang Yuntao nodded. The rock that was sprayed by the mucus wasn't far from him. He naturally saw everything that happened just now. Seeing that the ball of mucus had such a strong corrosive power, Zhang Yuntao was so shocked that his heart turned cold. At this time, when he heard Hodaki mention it, he hurriedly nodded in response. "Second brother, I understand." After a while, Hodaki calmed down and walked forward again towards the fork in front of him. This time, Hodaki changed his tactics. He took out an arrow from behind him and held it in his hand. At the same time, he raised it above his head and looked like he was ready to shoot at any time. As he approached the fork, Hodaki became even more cautious. He moved his feet slowly, and as soon as he reached the front of the fork, he immediately let out a roar. Then, he quickly threw the arrow in his hand. After Hodaki threw the arrow in his hand, he immediately stomped on the ground and retreated like lightning. At the same time, a black shadow shot out from the darkness, streaking across the void and brushing past Hodaki's back. Hodaki had just dodged the attack when he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the dark tunnel. Cuckoo, after hearing this scream, Hodaki was immediately overjoyed. He knew that the arrow he had just thrown must have hit the monster in the darkness. Otherwise, its scream would not have been so mournful. After hearing this scream, Hodaki hurriedly stopped. Just as he was about to turn around, an underground poisonous frog with arrows pierced through its body jumped out from the fork. As soon as the underground poison frog jumped out, it immediately opened its mouth and its tongue flew out like lightning towards Hodaki. Zhang Yuntao saw that the situation was not good. He quickly stepped forward and waved the steel knife in his hand, chopping at the underground poison frog's tongue. Zhang Yuntao's martial arts skills were high and his strength was great. When the knife landed on the underground poison frog's tongue, it was immediately cut off. Cuckoo, with its tongue cut off, the underground poison frog let out another blood-curdling scream. It suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of mucus. Then it turned around and jumped hard, disappearing in front of the fork. At this time, Hodaki had already turned around. When he saw the underground poison frog spit out venom, he was almost scared out of his wits. He immediately exerted force on his feet and quickly retreated to the side. When Zhang Yuntao saw this ball of mucus, he naturally did not dare to be careless. He also quickly moved away and hid far away. As the two of them dodged with all their might, the underground poison frog's venom did not hurt anyone and flew far away. After dodging the attack of the ball of mucus, Hodaki hurriedly turned his head and looked in the direction of the underground poison frog. However, at the fork, the underground poison frog had already disappeared. Seeing that the underground poison frog had escaped, Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao looked at each other and secretly rejoiced that they had dodged quickly. Otherwise, if they were hit by that ball of mucus, they would definitely be dead. The two of them calmed down a little. Zhang Yuntao went forward and picked up the tongue that he had cut off. He looked at it and asked curiously, "Second brother, what do you think this is?" Hodaki looked at the half of the tongue in Zhang Yuntao's hand. Just as he was about to shake his head, he suddenly thought of something. "I know, this thing must be that monster's tongue. Only then would the monster cry out so miserably after you cut it off." Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao looked at it again and nodded. Indeed, this really does look like a tongue. Although I have never seen such a big tongue, I could vaguely see that this thing was spat out from that thing's mouth. Hodaki thought for a while and said slowly, "Not only that, third brother, why does that monster look like a big frog?" Zhang Yuntao also nodded. "It does look like one. Not only does it look like one, but when it came out and when it escaped, it jumped instead of walking. I think only things like frogs would jump." Hodaki nodded and took out an arrow from behind him. He turned to Zhang Yuntao and said, "I'll go ahead and see if there are any more monsters there." Zhang Yuntao nodded and raised the steel sword in his hand. He was ready to go forward and support at any time. It was still the same old plan. As soon as Hodaki walked out of the fork, he immediately threw the arrow in his hand into the darkness and immediately retreated again. This time, there was no attack from the darkness, nor was there a scream. After waiting for a while, Hodaki was sure that the monster should have been injured and ran away. Hodaki walked towards the dark fork again. Although there was no sound from the fork, Hodaki still did not dare to be careless. The attack of the monster's tongue was secondary. The main thing was that the mucus it spat out was too powerful. As long as he was hit by that mucus, there was basically no hope for him. Hodaki carefully went forward to search. Zhang Yuntao did not dare to be negligent. He walked behind Hodaki, afraid that something unexpected would happen. Hodaki slowly walked to the opposite side of the fork and stabilized his body. There was nothing attacking him from the fork. After waiting for a while, Hodaki was completely relieved. The big monster really ran away. Chapter 66. Hodaki was slightly relieved when he saw that there were no more monsters in the fork. He turned to look at Zhang Yuntao behind him and said in a low voice, "It seems that the monster ran away." Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, are we going to continue?" Hodaki turned his head and looked at the tunnel in front of him. He thought for a moment and nodded. "We don't know what's in front of us. Why don't we go a little further and decide if we want to continue?" Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Okay, in that case, I'll take the lead this time." Hodaki shook his head. "Let me do it. We don't know what monsters are in front of us." Zhang Yuntao raised the sword in his hand and said with a smile, "Second brother, your weapon is not as good as mine. If there are monsters in front of us, my sword can at least cut off their tongues. I don't think your weapon will work. Let me scout ahead." Hodaki thought for a moment and agreed. His bow had a broken string. Even if he encountered monsters, he could only repel them and not cause any damage. Thinking of this, Hodaki nodded and said, "Okay, you scout ahead. But you have to be careful. The mucus that the monster spits out is too strong. Don't get hit by it." Zhang Yuntao nodded. "Second brother, I know. I'll be careful." While speaking, Zhang Yuntao gripped the steel sword in his hand and walked forward. Zhang Yuntao walked forward. Before long, he saw two more forks in the rock wall in front of him. He was shocked. The two forks in front of them were not on the same side of the rock wall, but on opposite sides of the rock wall. Although they were slightly separated, the two forks could still see each other. If there was only one fork, it would be fine. Even if there were monsters in the fork, they could only attack from one side. Now that the two forks were on both sides of the tunnel, it was very difficult to deal with. If he walked to the middle of the fork, he would be attacked from both sides. This was very difficult to deal with. He might even be hit by monsters from one side. Looking at the two forks, Zhang Yuntao's forehead was covered in cold sweat. How should he get through? However, since he was already here, he had to find a way to get past it. Thinking of this, Zhang Yuntao took a deep breath and clenched the steel saber in his hand. Then, he slowly walked forward toward the two passageways in front of him. At this moment, Hodaki, who had been walking behind, suddenly took a few steps forward and grabbed Zhang Yuntao's shoulder, stopping him from moving forward. Zhang Yuntao turned his head and saw that Hodaki was slowly taking off his coat. He suddenly understood Hodaki's idea and was overjoyed. He hurriedly gave Hodaki a thumbs up to express his admiration. Seeing this, Hodaki only smiled. Then he took off his coat and hung it on the broken bough. After finishing these actions, Hodaki turned to look at Zhang Yuntao and gestured for him to get ready. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao hurriedly nodded, indicating that he understood. Only then did Hodaki challenge his coat with a broken bowstring and explore the path in front of the fork. Seeing the coat slowly approaching the fork, the two nervously held their breaths and stared at the two forks in front of them. Just as Hodaki picked up the coat in front of the fork, the two underground poison frogs hiding at the two forks immediately launched an attack. The underground poison frog hiding closer to the coat immediately opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of venom. As for the underground poison frog further away, because of its distance, it only flicked out its tongue. Seeing that the two attacks from the left and right hit the coat, Hodaki did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took out the arrow in his right hand and threw it towards the dark fork that spat out the venom. Goo goo! Immediately, a scream came from the dark fork. Hodaki was overjoyed. Just as he was about to go forward and end it, unexpectedly, the underground poison frog hiding in the fork suddenly jumped out. It opened its mouth and shot out its tongue, hitting Hodaki's body like lightning. Caught off guard, Hodaki was hit and immediately felt a burst of pain. It was so painful that he could not help but groan. His body was also hit back 2 steps before he could stabilize himself. But this was not the end. Just as Hodaki steadied himself, he felt that the big tongue that hit him was dragging him towards the big frog. Hodaki was shocked. If he was dragged over by the tongue and the big frog spat out another mouthful of venom, it would be too late. Thinking of this, Hodaki did not care much. He hurriedly grabbed the broken bough and smashed it towards the big tongue. But this was useless. Even if the broken bough could be used as an iron rod, it could not be used as a knife. Although he hit it hard, it only made the big frog scream. His body was still being dragged forward. Zhang Yuntao, who was originally looking at the other fork, saw that the situation was not good. He hurriedly backhanded his knife and cut off the big frog's tongue. After the big frog's tongue was cut off, Hodaki had just stabilized himself and immediately jumped to the side to dodge. Just as Hodaki's figure dodged, the big frog whose tongue was cut off had already spat out a mouthful of venom. It brushed past him and flew past. Hodaki had just dodged the big frog's attack, and he immediately growled, "Die for me!" As he spoke, Hodaki had already used all his strength to throw the broken bough in his hand towards the big frog. Hodaki was an archer. Naturally, his accuracy was not to be questioned. Coupled with his strong inner force, when he used all his strength, how could he be underestimated? The broken bough that Hodaki threw was like lightning. It pierced through the big frog's mouth and came out from the back of its head. It was stuck there just like that. Seeing this, Zhang Yuntao naturally did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and came in front of the big frog. He waved the steel knife in his hand and slashed 5 times at lightning speed. Then he stepped hard on the ground and retreated in a flash. Croak, croak, the giant frog that was slashed by Zhang Yuntao immediately let out continuous blood-curdling screams. At this moment, the attack from the other fork also arrived. Just as Zhang Yuntao retreated, a ball of mucus flew out from the darkness. However, when Zhang Yuntao retreated, the ball of mucus hit the big frog's body. Croak, croak. After the big frog was hit by the ball of mucus, it suddenly let out a strange scream. In just a moment, the big frog's scream stopped. Its huge body also fell to the ground and did not move anymore. Chapter 67. Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao let out a long sigh of relief when they saw the underground poison frog fall. However, they still didn't dare to let down their guard because there was another big frog hidden at the other side of the fork. Hodaki walked to the side of the wall and took out an arrow. He hooked the clothes he threw away on the ground and slowly pulled it back. After retrieving the clothes, Hodaki reached out and picked it up. He looked at it and found that the place where the venom sprayed had already corroded a big hole. Looking at the corroded hole, Hodaki thought for a moment and folded the clothes again. He then took out 2 arrows and placed them on the left and right sides of the clothes, forming something like a flag. Zhang Yuntao saw this and immediately understood Hodaki's idea. He hurriedly lowered his voice and asked, "Second brother, do you want to rush up like this?" Hodaki nodded. "I've been paying attention just now. Although the venom is very corrosive, it didn't penetrate the clothes after hitting it. So I want to try." Zhang Yuntao heard this and immediately became anxious. If Hodaki succeeded, it would be fine. If he failed, wouldn't he die without a doubt? Hodaki saw that Zhang Yuntao still wanted to persuade him and wave his hand. "I'm just trying. It doesn't matter. Don't worry, I'll be careful." After saying this, Hodaki didn't wait for Zhang Yuntao to answer. He picked up the clothes with one hand and an arrow with the other hand and walked towards the fork in the road ahead. Zhang Yuntao saw that it was useless to persuade him anymore. He could only carry the steel knife and walk closely behind Hodaki, ready to support him at any time. Although Hodaki said it casually, he was actually very nervous. He also knew very well that if the poison attack of the giant frog could penetrate the clothes, then he would be finished. It could be said that he was only separated from death by a piece of clothes. Hodaki picked up the clothes in his hand and stared at the front with his eyes wide open. As long as he walked to the front of the fork, he would definitely not hesitate and immediately throw the arrow in his hand. At this time, the passage was very quiet. Hodaki felt that only his heartbeat was left in this passage, constantly echoing in his ears. Just as Daki walked to the side of the fork in the passage, the underground poison frog, hiding inside, launched an attack. A ball of mucus flew out from the darkness and hit Daki's clothes, but did not make any sound. Daki only felt his clothes tremble violently for a moment before everything returned to normal. At this moment, Daki didn't dare to be negligent. Almost subconsciously, he quickly threw out the arrow in his hand. Not only that, as soon as the arrow left his hand, he immediately took out another arrow and threw it out. Cuckoo! A few screams immediately came from the dark fork. Just as Daki was about to go forward, he suddenly realized that the clothes in front of him had been corroded and had a big hole. Seeing this, Daki didn't dare to move forward anymore. If the giant frog launched another venom attack at this time, there would be nothing to block it. Just now, Daki had been able to challenge the giant frog with the clothes covering his body. Now that there was nothing blocking him, Daki would be courting death if he went up to challenge the giant frog. Daki looked at the big hole in his clothes and didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly took 2 steps back, away from the threat of the fork in the passage. Although Daki had retreated, Zhang Yuntao didn't dare to be negligent. Just now, the underground poison frog jumped out angrily because it was shot by Daki's arrow. It wanted to take revenge. Zhang Yuntao stared at the entrance of the passage, afraid that the underground poison frog would suddenly run out and spray venom at the two of them. However, after waiting for a while, the two of them didn't see any underground poison frog running out from the fork in the passage ahead. They couldn't help but feel puzzled. Second brother, was that big frog killed by the arrow you threw just now? Hearing this, Daki shook his head. I don't know. It was dark inside and I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the giant frog's screams, but I don't know where it was shot. After waiting for a while, there was still no movement in front of them. Zhang Yuntao couldn't help but smile. Second brother, it seems that the giant frog was either shot to death or scared away by you. Daki shook his head. Don't be careless. It's better to be careful. Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao looked at the fork in front and said in a low voice, Second brother, why don't you wait for me here, and I'll go there and take a look. Daki shook his head. No, if that giant frog has been hiding inside, wouldn't that be terrible? Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't help but ask, Second brother, what should we do? Daki looked at the fork in front of him and kept thinking of a solution in his heart. It was impossible to not go to the front and take a look. They couldn't keep wasting time here. How could they get there? Daki looked around and suddenly saw the giant frog on the ground. His heart suddenly moved. He hurriedly turned his head to look at Zhang Yuntao and said in a low voice, Wait a minute, I'll throw that giant frog over. If there's still a giant frog in the fork, it will definitely attack it. Hearing this, Zhang Yuntao nodded and put the steel saber back into the scabbard. He said with a smile, Second brother, let me do it this time. Daki nodded. Okay, you have to be more careful. Zhang Yuntao smiled and turned his head to look at the fork in front of him. Then he looked at the giant frog on the ground. He thought for a moment and immediately took a deep breath. Then he jumped forward and jumped in front of the giant frog. He reached out and grabbed the giant frog and threw it toward the fork in front of him. As soon as Zhang Yuntao threw the giant frog in his hand, he immediately jumped back. As for the situation at the fork, with the giant frog in the air blocking him, he couldn't see it. It was useless to stay there any longer. Although Zhang Yuntao couldn't see the situation at the fork, Daki could see it very clearly. As soon as Zhang Yuntao threw the giant frog over, Daki saw a black shadow fly out from the fork and hit the giant frog that flew over. In just a moment, the giant frog that was still in the air was corroded and emitted a white gas. Seeing this situation, Daki's heart was filled with horror. If he had rushed over blindly just now, then the giant frog's venom attack would have hit both of them. Zhang Yuntao, who had retreated, was secretly glad. Just now, if his second brother didn't stop him from going forward to investigate, then he would have been hit by this ball of venom. Thinking of the consequences of being hit by this ball of venom, Zhang Yuntao only felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't help but shiver. Chapter 68. Hodaki threw away the corroded clothes in his hand and looked at the fork in front of him vigilantly. Just now, the big frog in the other fork jumped out to attack him because he threw an arrow at it. This time, he had to be careful. However, after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the big frog jump out from the fork. Hodaki was puzzled. Zhang Yuntao saw that the big frog didn't jump out and was a little impatient. He also took off his coat, held it with his knife, and stretched it towards the fork. Just as Zhang Yuntao was about to move forward to test the waters, he suddenly heard the faint sound of something landing on the ground from the previously cleared fork. In such a dangerous place, Zhang Yuntao naturally didn't dare to be careless. After he heard the sound, he immediately jumped back. He didn't even bother to pick up the coat that fell to the ground. Fortunately, Zhang Yuntao didn't pick up the coat that fell to the ground. When he jumped away from the spot, a ball of mucus flew out from the mouth of the passage like lightning and hit the place where Zhang Yuntao was originally standing. Looking at the sizzling rock that was corroded, Zhang Yuntao's forehead suddenly dripped with cold sweat. He secretly rejoiced in his heart. Fortunately, he ran fast enough. Otherwise, he would end up like the rock. In the dark fork, after the ball of venom was spat out, there was no sound. In the passage, peace was restored again. Although the passage was quiet, Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao's mood was absolutely not calm. The two of them looked at each other and shook their heads with a bitter smile. After a long while, Hodaki sighed and said in a low voice, "Third brother, let's go back and tell Big Brother about what happened here and see what he thinks." Zhang Yuntao nodded. He also knew in his heart that with just the two of them, they would definitely not be able to pass this level. The two of them made up their minds and slowly retreated until they reached the third fork that they just entered. The two of them then dared to turn around and go back the way they came. The way back was very safe. Along the way, they didn't encounter any monsters. Even so, Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao didn't dare to be careless. After fighting with the giant frog for a while, the two of them had a feeling that every tree and bush was an enemy. Even the slightest sound would make the two of them alert for a long time. After a while, the nervous Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao finally saw the big space they had come out of. They immediately relaxed, feeling as if they had just escaped death. After Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao left, Mu Hongyi waited anxiously. Although Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao's martial arts were good, it was still not enough here. After waiting for a long time, just as Mu Hongyi was getting impatient, he finally saw Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao return to the large space. After Mu Hongyi saw the two of them, he hurriedly walked over and asked, "How is it? Is this passage safe?" Hearing this, Hodaki shook his head and recounted what had happened in the passageway. After Mu Hongyi listened carefully, his heart sank. He originally thought that the big bat and the big mouse were already powerful enough, but he didn't expect that there would be a big frog that could spray venom. Not only that, it seemed that the number of big frogs was definitely not small. Mu Hongyi couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart at the thought of countless big frogs spraying venom at him at the same time. What should I do? If I go back, I will encounter those big bats. If I go forward, I will encounter those big frogs that can spray venom. What should I do? The monsters on both sides are very powerful. Neither side is easy to provoke. What should I do? Mu Hongyi was so anxious that cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He looked at the last remaining passage and kept praying in his heart, hoping that they wouldn't encounter more powerful monsters. At this time, everyone also heard the news. For a moment, they fell into silence. Everyone was thinking, which way should they go? In the end, everyone's eyes were on the last passage. This passage was everyone's only hope of escaping. Going back, there were countless big bats blocking the way. On the other side, there were powerful big frogs blocking the way. If they couldn't get out of the last passage, I'm afraid after a long while, Mu Hongyi slowly said, "Since there are big frogs blocking the way, let's take another passage." Hearing this, everyone nodded silently. At this moment, this was the only way. Everyone had no other choice. They could only pray that there wouldn't be any powerful monsters in this passage. In fact, the monsters they encountered after entering the passage weren't very powerful. With Mu Hongyi's skills, dealing with hundreds of big bats or hundreds of large-toothed rats was absolutely no problem. However, numbers were a big problem. Whether it was the big bats or the large-toothed rats, their numbers were almost endless. No matter how strong one's combat power was, they would probably be overwhelmed by this endless number. Even the big frogs that could spray venom weren't that strong. The key was that these things hid in the dark and used their venom and tongues to sneak attack you. This was very troublesome. Seeing that no one had any objections, Mu Hongyi waved his hand and took the lead to walk toward the last passage. Hodaki and the others didn't dare to neglect. Seeing that their big brother had left, they hurriedly chased after him. Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming looked at each other and shook their heads with a wry smile. They all understood that if there were any more powerful monsters in this passage, they would probably never be able to get out. Zhang Ming didn't care. If everyone really couldn't get out in the end, he could just open up another passage and let everyone out alive. Seeing that everyone had walked into the passage, Zhang Ming also followed leisurely and walked into the passage. Everyone left the big space and walked into the passage. Mu Hongyi, who was walking in front, didn't dare to be careless. He always circulated his internal energy throughout his body to guard against any danger that might appear at any time. Hodaki and Zhang Yuntao were even more careful. Ever since they saw the big frog's venom attack, they would almost immediately think that there was a big frog hiding in the shadows on the walls. Everyone walked in fear for an unknown period of time. Just when everyone felt that there shouldn't be any danger, Mu Hongyi, who was walking in front, suddenly waved his hand at the people behind him, indicating for them to stop. Everyone was shocked when they saw Mu Hongyi waving his hand. They hurriedly stopped and looked at the passage in front of them. Mu Hongyi didn't look at the passage in front of him. He was looking at his feet. A killed large-toothed rat. Further away, there were even more killed large-toothed rats. Seeing this scene, a glimmer of hope suddenly surged in Mu Hongyi's heart. Chapter 69. Mu Hongyi had checked the wounds of these rats. They were probably injured by swords and knives. Only humans could use swords and knives. Although humans had enemies too, at this moment, even if they were enemies, Mu Hongyi would still feel close to them. As long as he didn't have to face monsters like bats and rats again, he would be fine. Hodaki saw Mu Hongyi lowering his head and pondering. He quickly walked up to him and said in a low voice, "Big brother, I'll go ahead and take a look." Mu Hongyi nodded. "Second brother, thank you for your hard work. You have to be careful too." Hodaki responded and walked forward with a broken bow in his hand. After walking for a short distance, Hodaki found even more rats. The further he walked, the more rats there were. In the end, Hodaki almost had no place to walk. At this moment, Hodaki couldn't care less. He stepped on these rats and walked forward. Finally, the number of rats decreased. They didn't decrease slowly, but they disappeared all of a sudden. Hodaki looked at the traces on the ground and guessed that someone must have fought with these large-toothed rats here. Someone was obstructing the large-toothed rats here, stopping them from moving forward. Seeing that they could kill so many rats, Hodaki guessed that these people must be quite powerful. Thinking of this, Hodaki didn't waste any more time and walked forward again. Along the way, there were no more rats. Even so, Hodaki didn't dare to be careless. Who knew what kind of monsters were hiding in this dark tunnel? After walking for a long time, Hodaki, who had been trying his best to move forward in the tunnel, suddenly stopped. His face was full of joy. "I'm out. I'm finally out of this damn place." Hodaki was stunned for a moment. He immediately took big steps and ran towards the light in front of him. There was only darkness in the tunnel. If there was light, it must be the entrance of the tunnel. With this thought, Hodaki ran all the way. Soon, he was not far from the entrance of the tunnel. At this moment, he suddenly heard a voice. He was shocked. He quickly stopped and listened carefully. "Captain, when do you think the Raymond family's people will arrive?" "I don't know. I don't think they'll arrive today. Even if they're fast, I think they'll have to wait until tomorrow. Hearing the conversation outside, Hodaki felt that it sounded familiar. He thought about it carefully and suddenly remembered. The voices outside, weren't they the people who had fought with him yesterday? Now that he knew that the people outside were enemies, Hodaki didn't dare to be careless. He carefully retreated until he was far away and couldn't hear the sounds outside anymore. Then he turned around and ran back the way he came. Now that he knew there were no monsters in this tunnel, Hodaki ran as fast as he could and soon returned to the group. Seeing Hodaki's anxious appearance, Muhongi's heart sank and he hurriedly asked, "Second brother, did you encounter a monster?" Hodaki shook his head. "There are no more monsters ahead. We'll be outside soon." Everyone rejoiced when they heard this. However, Muhongi asked when he saw Hodaki's worried expression, "Is there any other danger?" Hodaki said, "Big brother, do you remember the group of people who fought with us yesterday?" Muhongi nodded. "Of course I remember." "Why?" Hodaki said, "Those people were guarding the entrance of the tunnel." Muhongi was shocked when he heard this. He hurriedly asked, "Second brother, did you see clearly? Were they really those people?" Hodaki nodded. "Although I didn't see them with my own eyes from the sound, it was definitely them." Muhongi pondered when he heard Hodaki's affirmative answer. Why were those people at the entrance of the tunnel? Were they waiting for him? Were they waiting for him to come out of the tunnel to ambush him and the others? No. How did those people know that he would come out from this tunnel? So far, Muhongi knew that there were two tunnels that led to the outside. One was the tunnel that they had entered halfway up the mountain, and the other was the tunnel in front of him. If those people really wanted to ambush him and the others, how could they have thought that he and the others would come out from this tunnel? No, it shouldn't be like this. Thinking of this, Muhongi suddenly thought of the killed large-toothed rats in front of him, and his heart skipped a beat. Could it be that these large-toothed rats were killed by them? They had originally wanted to come in from this tunnel, but they had encountered a large number of large-toothed rats. After a fierce battle, they had retreated from this tunnel. Thinking of this, Muhongi looked at Hodaki and asked, "Second brother, what did they say? Did you hear it?" Hodaki shook his head. "I only heard them say that they seemed to be waiting for someone from the Raymond family. This person from the Raymond family should be here tomorrow at the earliest." Muhongi felt that he had guessed right. They must have encountered these large-toothed rats. Seeing that they couldn't rush in, they retreated and guarded the entrance of the tunnel. When reinforcements arrived, they would enter the tunnel together. Thinking of those people outside, Muhongi's heart skipped a beat. Weren't those people thinking the same thing as him? They also wanted to wait for reinforcements to arrive before coming in to explore. If that was the case, their strength might not be as good as his side. At the very least, he and the others had entered from the first tunnel and rushed here, but they were blocked not far away. Thinking of this, Muhongi increasingly felt that the other party's strength was not as good as his side. Since the other party's strength was not as good as his side, there was nothing to be afraid of. Thinking of this, Muhongi turned to look at everyone. "Let's go out now. If those people outside dare to stop us, don't hold back. Get rid of them as soon as possible." Everyone nodded when they heard this. If it was just dealing with some enemies, there was nothing to be afraid of. It was much better than facing an endless number of bats and large-toothed rats. Seeing that everyone was ready, Muhongi waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "Let's go. Let's go out." Everyone responded and followed behind Muhongi as they walked towards the entrance of the tunnel. Everyone passed by those large-toothed rats that had been killed and walked for a long time before they saw the light at the entrance of the tunnel. Seeing this light, everyone's spirits were lifted. They were finally out of this damned place. Fan Shouwu even secretly swore in his heart that he would never come to this place again. Even if he was beaten to death, he would never come again. Seeing that the light was getting closer and closer, Muhongi turned his head and whispered, "We're almost out of the tunnel. We're almost out of the passageway. Everyone, be careful in case those people outside suddenly attack us." Hearing this, everyone responded in a low voice and took out their weapons, ready to fight. Chapter 70. Seeing that everyone was ready, Mu Hongyi took the lead and walked out of the passage with the cold light sword in his hand. The fierce wind mercenary corps, who were waiting for reinforcements at the entrance of the passage, were shocked to see so many people suddenly appear. Green was the first to react. He immediately stood up, pulled out his two-handed sword, and pointed at Mu Hongyi. "Who are you?" Green's words stopped abruptly halfway through. He recognized these people coming out of the passageway. Weren't they the people from the Onwu kingdom who had fought with him on the way here? Thinking that the other party could actually come out of the passage, Green was shocked. He hurriedly waved his hand and commanded the mercenaries to retreat a few steps before asking again. "How did you come out of there?" Hearing this, Mu Hongyi did not answer the other party's question. He directly raised the cold light sword in his hand and pointed at the other party. "How did you come here?" Green had entered the passage before and naturally knew how powerful the monsters in the passage were. At this time, seeing that the other party could actually come and go freely in the passage, he was already a little scared and did not want to fight. Seeing that the other party asked, he did not hide anything and directly answered. "We came here and found this passage. In the end, after we entered, we were stopped by those large-toothed rats. We had no choice but to retreat." Hearing this, Mu Hongyi was slightly relieved. After a few battles with the big bats and big rats, he did not want to fight anymore. "Could it be that those large-toothed rats in the passage were killed by you?" Hearing this, Green nodded. "Yes, we killed them, but there were too many of those big rats. Although we killed so many, we still could not rush in." Speaking of this, Green paused and then asked, "What about you? How did you come out of the passage?" Hearing this, Mu Hongyi thought for a while. There was no need to hide the places that he had been to. Moreover, Hodaki also heard from them that the other party's reinforcements would arrive soon. At that time, the other party would definitely find the passage. Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi pointed at the mountain and said, "We came down from above." Hearing this, Green's eyes suddenly narrowed and he hurriedly asked, "Did you enter from a mountain?" Mu Hongyi nodded. "Yes." Green asked, "Are there no big rats in the passage on the mountain?" Mu Hongyi shook his head. "No, but there are some big bats." Hearing this, Grim was stunned at first, then asked, "Are those big bats very big too?" Mu Hongyi nodded. "Not only is it big, but it's also red." At this point, Mu Hongyi asked, "What are you doing here?" Seeing that the other party was indeed not here to attack his mercenary group, Green did not hide it and directly replied, "We have already sent the news back and are now waiting for reinforcements." At this point, Grim laughed bitterly. "Actually, we can't be considered reinforcements. Our mission is to find out the whereabouts of the Nightmare Eagle. We're only staying here to see if we can get some benefits." Mu Hongyi nodded when he heard this. There was nothing strange about this. Everyone thought so. At this point, everyone had basically understood each other and also understood that the other party did not have any malicious intentions. Green pointed at the roasting food on the fire behind him and said with a smile, "Why don't we all get together for a drink?" Mu Hongyi shook his head. Although he was certain that the other party would not attack him, he still needed to be on guard. "Thank you, but I want to go to the passageway on the mountain to have a look." Hearing this, Grim did not stop him. After all, they were not on the same side. There was no harm in keeping a distance between them. Mu Hongyi led everyone safely back to the passageway halfway up the mountain. Only then did he feel slightly relieved and let everyone rest where they were. Everyone sat in front of the passageway and looked at the dark passageway. They felt as if they had been separated for a lifetime. Everyone knew that everything that had happened in the passageway had just happened. At this time, they felt that it was unreal. It was as if the scene of a life-and-death battle in the passageway was just a dream. After everyone sat down to rest, Mu Hongyi took out a paper talisman. After looking at it for a long time, he sighed. Then he silently operated his magic skill and poured his internal energy into the paper talisman. After a long while, the paper talisman in Mu Hongyi's hand slowly turned into ashes and disappeared in the air. When Mu Hongyi had just raised the paper talisman in his hand, Zhang Meng had noticed it. When the paper talisman turned into ashes, Zhang Meng looked at it more carefully. Zhang Meng vaguely saw that when the paper talisman in Mu Hongyi's hand turned into ashes, it did not disappear. Instead, it turned into a faint shadow. This faint shadow slowly rotated around Mu Hongyi's hand. Then, it turned into a stream of light and rushed into the sky like lightning, disappearing into the horizon. Seeing such a strange scene, Zhang Ming hurriedly pushed Fan Shouwu beside him and asked, "Fan Gongzi, just now, what was that paper in Lord Mu's hand?" Fan Shouwu had already seen Mu Hongyi when he had just picked up the paper talisman. At this moment, when he heard Zhang Ming's question, he smiled and replied, "It's nothing. It's just a sound transmission talisman." Speaking of this, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before explaining. "Think about it. We are so far away from Onwu Kingdom. If we want to run back, it will take a lot of time to go back and forth. Therefore, when everyone has important matters to attend to, they will bring a sound transmission talisman with them. At the critical moment, as long as you inject your inner strength into the sound transmission talisman, it won't take long for the other party to know your location. If there are no accidents, someone will quickly rush here." Zhang Ming nodded when he heard this. He guessed that the stream of light he saw just now should be the sound transmission talisman flying back. After Mu Hongyi sent the message back with the sound transmission talisman, he turned his head to look at the passage. After a long while, he turned his head to look at Fan Shouwu and said seriously, "You understand the situation in the passage, so I don't want to explain anymore. I just want to say that you should go back with Prince Zhang. If you continue to stay here, I'm afraid that we won't be able to protect you. If something goes wrong, I won't be able to answer to the deputy prefectural governor." Fan Shouwu nodded when he heard this. Lord Mu is right. Our martial arts skills are too low here. Not only will we not be of help, but we will also be a burden to Lord Mu. I think that our best choice is to go back. Mu Hongyi nodded when he heard this. At the same time, he felt slightly relieved. If Fan Shouwu insisted on not going back, then he really had no good way to force him to go back. Chapter 71. At this time, it was getting late. Everyone rested for a while and ate some dry rations. By then, the sky had already turned dark. There were no big trees or anything like that here. Even if they wanted to start a fire, it would be impossible. However, it was not comfortable to spend a night in a place full of dust. Mu Hongyi thought for a while and let everyone enter the passageway and rest not far from the entrance. At the same time, he let everyone take turns to stand guard in the deeper parts of the passageway to prevent large bats from rushing over. That night, everyone had a rather peaceful time. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Early the next morning, Mu Hongyi found Fan Shouwu and urged him to hurry back. Seeing that Mu Hongyi was urging him, Fan Shouwu did not hesitate and immediately led the people he had brought with him away from the entrance of the passageway and walked down the mountain. Seeing the backs of Fan Shouwu and the others leaving, Mu Hongyi was completely relieved. Although there were dangers on the way back, it was much safer than here. Moreover, Fan Shouwu and the others also had martial arts. Even if they encountered some danger, they should be able to get through it safely. At this time, Hodaki came to Mu Hongyi's side and looked at the backs of Fan Shouwu and the others as they left. After a while, he said slowly, "Big brother, what should we do when the commander sends people here?" Hearing this, Mu Hongyi shook his head. "I don't know either. Let's talk about it when the reinforcements arrive." To be honest, Mu Hongyi was really hesitant now. He was very clear about the situation in the passageway. He had personally experienced how dangerous it was inside. In the face of endless monsters, as long as they relaxed even a little, they would immediately be drowned in the sea of monsters. Not only that, it would not be easy to escape even if they wanted to. The passageway was so dangerous. Did they still need to enter it? Mu Hongyi was really hesitant. After thinking for a while, he still could not make up his mind. This was because there was still a thought in his mind. If there was some treasure in the passageway, then if he missed this opportunity, he was afraid that he would have no hope of advancing in his life. Although there should be reinforcements arriving tomorrow, would the reinforcements sent by the county governor's mansion really be useful? Could they really face the endless monsters? By now, Mu Hongyi had some doubts. He suspected that even if there were reinforcements, they might not be able to defeat those monsters. Seeing Mu Hongyi's hesitant expression, Hodaki sighed and said, "Big brother, since you are hesitant, I think we should wait for the reinforcements to arrive and then go back." Mu Hongyi heard this but did not answer. Although the passageway was dangerous, he knew that there would often be treasures hidden in the midst of great danger. At this time, Shun Feisher also walked to the side of the two and said, "Big brother, you can make the decision on this matter. No matter what decision you make, I will support you." When Mu Hongyi heard this, he looked at Shun Feisher, who was almost wrapped up like a mummy. He was a little touched. No matter how Lao Wu usually behaved, his courage was commendable. It was not bad. After all, no one was perfect. Everyone had some shortcomings. However, after Mu Hongyi heard Shun Feisher's words, his heart became heavier and heavier. If he entered the passageway alone, even if he encountered danger, he would only lose his life. However, if all four of his brothers entered the passageway with him, if they encountered danger, wouldn't they all be wiped out? In that case, how could he live up to his brother's trust? Thinking of this, Mu Hongyi patted Shun Feisher's shoulder and said with a sigh, "Lao Wu, it's hard for me to make a decision now. However, even if I decide to enter the passageway, I hope that you can go back and not go with me." "What if?" As soon as Mu Hongyi said this, Hodaki interrupted him. "Big brother, don't say any more. Since we're good brothers, if we want to go, we will go together. If not, we will go back together." After hearing Hodaki's words, Mu Hongyi shook his head. "Second brother, I understand your intentions, but this time it is really too dangerous. I won't hide it from you. I feel that even if we have reinforcements, we might not be able to open this passageway." Speaking of this, Mu Hongyi paused and said seriously, "After all, we have already entered this passageway. We are very clear about the strength of the monsters inside. Although the several elders of the county governor's mansion are much stronger than us in martial arts, I feel that they might not have a chance of winning in the face of countless large bats and those large rats." As soon as Mu Hongyi finished speaking, Hodaki added, "Big brother, don't forget about those large frogs. Those large frogs are hiding in the dark, and we can't see them. Moreover, they can spit venom. I think that even the elders of the county governor's mansion might not be able to survive if they are hit by the venom." When Mu Hongyi heard this, he nodded. Although he had never seen those big frogs, he had already heard Hodaki and Zhang Yunao talking about them very clearly. Especially the venom that the big frogs could spit, he had already remembered it in his heart. Mu Hongyi said, "That's why I don't want you to enter the passageway with me. If there is any danger, I will be the only one." Hearing this, Shun Feisher shook his head. "Big brother, if we retreat when there is danger, are we still brothers?" Mu Hongyi shook his head. "That's different. This time, I am stubborn. It has nothing to do with you." Hodaki said, "Big brother, I think it's better if you don't go. If you go, none of us will be at ease to let you go alone. In the end, we will all be in danger together." At this moment, Zhang Yuntao and Lan Jiong saw that the few of them were talking fiercely and also came forward. Zhang Yuntao said, "Big brother, I feel that this passageway is really not a place we should come to. Not only are the monsters inside dangerous, the key is that the passageway is too small. Even if we want to fight, it will be very disadvantageous for us. If we are not careful, we will fall into the trap of these monsters. Big brother, why don't we wait for the reinforcements to arrive and let them go? We can go back or continue to look for the Nightmare Eagle. It's better than staying here." After hearing Zhang Yuntao's words, Hodaki hurriedly said, "Third brother is right. Our mission this time is mainly to find the Nightmare Eagle. As for the matters in this passageway, let's leave it to the elders of the county governor's residence." Lan Jiong also advised, "Big brother, actually we should be considered very lucky to have entered the passageway this time. First of all, when we reached the space of the large bats, we didn't know where those large bats had gone. That was why we were able to safely pass through there. When we reached the space of the large rats, if the passageway hadn't suddenly collapsed and blocked the passage of those large rats, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to get out. Chapter 72. After Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming left, Zhang Ming naturally couldn't stay any longer. Speaking of which, he had come with Fan Shouwu. He couldn't possibly stay behind after Fan Shouwu left, right? Fan Shouwu led his men down the hill, turning left and right, and soon disappeared from the sight of Mu Hongyi and the others. After walking for a while, Fan Shouwu suddenly stopped. He turned his head to look at Zhang Qiuming and said with a smile, "Prince Zhang, why don't you take your men back first?" Zhang Qiuming was shocked when he heard this. He looked at Fan Shouwu with wide eyes and asked in surprise, "Fan Gongzi, could it be that you still want to go back?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "Go back? It's impossible to go back. Even if we go back, we will be chased back by Lord Mu." Zhang Qiuming was even more confused. He looked at Fan Shouwu and suddenly exclaimed after a long while, "Could it be that you want to look for the nightmare eagle?" After Fan Shouwu heard Zhang Qiuming's words, he nodded and explained, "We also wanted to take a look at the passage. The nightmare eagle doesn't seem to be there, so I want to go to the top of the mountain to take a look and see where the nightmare eagle lives." Zhang Qiuming hurriedly waved his hand to stop him. "Fan Gongzi, you can't do that. The monsters in the passage are already so powerful. We don't know what's on the top of the mountain. I think it's better not to go. If we encounter danger, I'm afraid we won't be able to deal with it with just the few of us." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he said disapprovingly, "If we encounter monsters in the passage, we won't be able to escape even if we want to. However, even if we encounter monsters outside, I think it shouldn't be a problem as long as we are careful and don't be discovered by the monsters." After Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's explanation, he became even more anxious. "Fan Gongzi, it's better not to go. The monsters here are too powerful. If we go to the top of the mountain, we won't encounter any other monsters. As long as the nightmare eagle sees us, I'm afraid we won't be so lucky again." When Zhang Qiuming saw that Fan Shouwu still wanted to speak, he hurriedly continued, "Fan Gongzi, I know you want a black feather cloak, but you don't have to risk your life like that. When we return, we'll think a way to buy one. Why take such a risk?" When Zhang Qiuming saw through Fan Shouwu's thoughts, his face couldn't help but turn red. However, he still said, "Prince Zhang, don't try to persuade me anymore. You should lead your people down the mountain. I'm going to the top of the mountain to see if there are any opportunities. If there are any powerful monsters there, I'll naturally retreat." At this point, Fan Shouwu paused for a moment before continuing, "Don't worry. You know that I'm not the kind of person who doesn't know his place. If there's any danger, I'll definitely retreat." Seeing that Fan Shouwu was determined to go, Zhang Qiuming could only sigh inwardly. He helplessly said, "All right, since you want to go to the top of the mountain to take a look, I'll accompany you. However, you must remember that if there's any danger, we must retreat." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. He grabbed Zhang Qiuming and said with a smile, "You're indeed my good brother. We can go through thick and thin together." When Zhang Qiuming heard this, he only felt bitterness in his heart. This time, it wasn't as simple as going through thick and thin together. Perhaps they would have to go through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames together. After speaking to Zhang Qiuming, Fan Shouwu turned his head to look at Zhang Ming. Just as he was about to speak, Zhang Ming spoke first. "Don't worry about me. I'll go with you. Since everyone came together, we should go back together." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he nodded repeatedly. "You're really a good brother. Don't worry. If there's any danger, I'll definitely lead everyone back. I won't let anyone lose their lives in vain." At this moment, old Luo had already caught up from behind. When he heard that Fan Shouwu wanted to go up the mountain again, he was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. "Young master, you must not go up the mountain again. If there's any danger, with our martial arts, we won't be able to protect you. Young master, let's hurry down the mountain and go back. We mustn't delay anymore. We've been out for so long. I'm afraid that the deputy prefectural governor is already very anxious. If we delay any longer and there's danger, no one will be able to bear the responsibility." Fan Shouwu smiled and shook his head. "Old Luo, I know your intentions. However, you don't have to worry. I have the final say here. If there's any problem, I'll naturally take responsibility. I won't let you be punished by Father. Don't worry." When old Luo heard this, he became even more anxious. He grabbed Fan Shouwu's arm and said loudly, "No, as a guard, I can't let young master take the risk. If you want to go, then let me go. Young master, lead everyone down the mountain and wait for me. When I understand what's going on at the top of the mountain, I'll go down the mountain and report to you. How about this?" To be honest, old Luo really didn't want to go up the mountain. The martial arts of the guards could be said to be the lowest among them. If there was any danger with their martial arts, they wouldn't be able to protect Fan Shouwu. Therefore, even though old Luo knew that he couldn't stop the danger, he could only persuade Fan Shouwu to hurry back and go up the mountain himself. Fan Shouwu was touched when he saw that old Luo would rather go up the mountain himself than let him go up the mountain. However, even though he was touched, Fan Shouwu knew that with old Luo's martial arts, it was impossible for him to reach the top of the mountain. Fan Shouwu shook his head. "Old Luo, don't worry. I've already seen the terrain here. Look at the thick dust under our feet. Even if we encounter danger, as long as we hide in the dust, the monsters won't be able to see us." When everyone heard this, they hurriedly looked down. Sure enough, the dust under their feet was very thick. There were even 20 centimeters of dust in some places. Looking at the thick dust under their feet and seeing Fan Shouwu's expression, old Luo knew that he couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. He could only helplessly nod his head and stop talking. Zhang Ming also didn't expect Fan Shouwu to be so meticulous. He actually thought that if they encounter a monster, everyone would hide in the dust. Seeing that no one objected, Fan Shouwu nodded his head in satisfaction. He then waved his hand in the air and said loudly, "Let's go. Follow me to the top of the mountain and find the nightmare eagle." Hearing Fan Shouwu's high-spirited words, everyone helplessly shook their heads. It could be said that in this group, only Fan Shouwu and Zhang Ming wanted to go to the top of the mountain to take a look. The rest of them only wanted to quickly descend the mountain and get as far away as possible so that they wouldn't be affected by the danger. Fan Shouwu naturally didn't know what everyone was thinking. At this moment, his mind was filled with the nightmare eagle's feathers, or rather, the black feather cloak. Chapter 73. Fan Shouwu led the way in front, and everyone followed behind him. The group of people once again set foot on the path up the mountain. In order not to be discovered by Mu Hongyi, Fan Shouwu deliberately led everyone in a big circle before walking up the mountain. This mountain was very high, and everyone had taken a detour, so the journey was naturally much longer. The group walked until noon, and they were only halfway up the mountain. Seeing that they were still far from the top, Fan Shouwu ordered them to rest and eat lunch while they were at it. Although there was not much prey in this place, everyone had brought dry food. Although it was not a lot, it was not a problem for them to eat a few meals. With dry food, they could eat their fill. The only drawback was that there was no water on this mountain. The water that everyone had brought had long been drunk. They could only force themselves to eat the hard dry food to make do with a meal. After lunch, everyone rested for a while before continuing to climb up the mountain. The remaining part of the journey was still very long. Everyone walked until evening, but they still did not reach the top of the mountain. Fan Shouwu looked at the top of the mountain that was not very far away. Just as he was about to encourage everyone, suddenly, an eagle's cry came from the top of the mountain. His expression immediately froze, and he hurriedly waved at everyone. At the same time, he lowered his voice and shouted, "The nightmare eagle has come out. Let's hide quickly." Everyone, who was already exhausted, heard the eagle's cry and Fan Shouwu's words. They immediately perked up and did not care much. They hurriedly rolled a few times on the ground, covering their bodies with dust. At the same time, they hid in places where the dust was thicker. Not long after, another eagle's cry was heard. Everyone was even more shocked. The nightmare eagle's voice was even closer to them. A moment later, everyone saw the nightmare eagle flying over where they were. Seeing the nightmare eagle above their heads, everyone did not even dare to breathe loudly. They stared at the nightmare eagle in the air, afraid that it would discover them. Fortunately, the nightmare eagle did not seem to discover them. It only quickly flew over their heads and soon disappeared into the dense forest in the distance. Seeing the nightmare eagle fly far away, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone had already tasted the power of the nightmare eagle. Not to mention its physical attacks, just its ability to spit fire was something that no one could defend against. No one could guarantee that they would be able to survive after being hit by the nightmare eagle's flames. After waiting for a while, not only was the shadow of the nightmare eagle nowhere to be seen, even its voice couldn't be heard. Only then did everyone feel completely relieved and crawled out of the dust. Fan Shou glanced at the spot where the nightmare eagle had disappeared and whispered to everyone, "Everyone work hard. Now that the nightmare eagle isn't at the top of the mountain, let's use this opportunity to quickly climb to the top of the mountain and see the situation there." When everyone heard this, they naturally did not dare to delay. Fan Shou was right. Now that the nightmare eagle had flown away, this place should be safe. Everyone once again set foot on the path to the top of the mountain. This time, Fan Shou was still leading the way. In order to reach the top of the mountain before the nightmare eagle flew back, everyone rushed all the way, almost exploding with all their potential. Finally, before the nightmare eagle returned, they climbed to a place not far from the top of the mountain. Seeing that there were only a few hundred meters left to the top of the mountain, Fan Shou wiped the sweat off his forehead and cursed softly. Why is this lousy place so hot? It was indeed very hot here. Everyone had just climbed here when they felt a gust of hot air blowing against their faces. Not only was the air hot, everyone felt that even the rocks under their feet were hot. However, this state had its benefits. When everyone sat on the rocks to rest, they felt as if they were sitting on a heated brick bed. It was warm and comfortable. Some of them were even lying on the rocks, enjoying the warmth. Seeing this situation and looking at the situation at the top of the mountain, Zhang Meng was a little puzzled. Why did the top of the mountain in front of them look like the legendary volcano? It was so hot here, and the rocks under their feet were also so hot. Could it be that the volcano had erupted again? Zhang Meng felt that something was wrong. If they really caught up with the volcanic eruption, it could be said that other than himself, everyone would be burned to ashes by the magma. Not only Fan Shou and the others, but even Mu Hongyi and the others would not be spared. Zhang Meng had seen volcanic eruptions on TV before. He knew that once a volcano erupted, its power was definitely not something that humans could withstand. However, Fan Shou and the others did not know. They had never watched the live broadcast on TV. They only felt that it was a little hot here and kept cursing. Zhang Xiaoming walked to Fan Shou's side and said with some doubt, "Fan Gongzi, why is it so hot here?" Fan Shou shook his head. How could he know why it was so hot? He was still a little puzzled. Zhang Xiaoming reached out to touch his feet and muttered to himself, "Even the ground is a little hot." The reason why Fan Shou told everyone to rest was because the last part of the road was not easy to walk. Although they were not far from the top of the mountain and were only a few hundred meters away. However, these few hundred meters were not easy to walk. In the beginning, the mountain that everyone climbed was still a slow slope. Gradually, it became steeper, but everyone could still accept it. However, in the last few hundred meters, it became even steeper. In some places, it had already reached a perfectly straight state. If they wanted to go up the mountain, they could only avoid the steep rock faces and find some places to climb. This process was definitely not fast. They could only find a way up the mountain bit by bit. Seeing that everyone's breathing had stabilized and that they had rested enough, Fan Shou decided to take advantage of the time when the sky was about to turn dark and quietly climb to the top of the mountain. Fan Shou stood up and looked at the crowd. He immediately waved his hand and said in a low voice, "Everyone, work harder. We'll leave now." Hearing this, everyone stood up and prepared to continue their journey. At this moment, old Luo suddenly walked quickly to Fan Shou's side and said in a low voice, "Young master, the nightmare eagle has already flown out for a long time. I'm afraid that he will suddenly fly back. If he sees us, it will be bad." Fan Shouwu was stunned and became even more anxious. He hurriedly said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go quickly. When the nightmare eagle flies back, we'll climb to the top of the mountain." After hearing Fan Shouwu's words, old Luo shook his head. "Young master, I'm afraid it's too late. I think that the nightmare eagle will be back soon." Hearing this, Fan Shouwu was shocked and hurriedly asked, "Then what should we do?" As the mountain became steeper and steeper, the dust on the ground became less and less. When the nightmare eagle returned, there would be no place to hide even if they wanted to. Hearing this, old Luo looked at the top of the mountain and said, Chapter 74. Old Luo pointed to the mountain peak not far away and said, "Why don't we go to the back of the mountain and ascend the mountain from the other side? Even if the nightmare eagle returns, he won't be able to find us. I think that would be much safer." Hearing this, Shinshou nodded and immediately waved his hand at the crowd and said loudly, "Let's go to the other side of the mountain." Everyone responded and walked around the mountain to the back of the mountain. At this moment, the sky was turning dark. Just as everyone reached the side of the mountain, Zhang Qiuming, who had been staring at the back, suddenly shouted in a low voice, "Everyone hide! The nightmare eagle is back." Hearing this, everyone hurriedly turned their heads to look. Indeed, not far away, the huge figure of the nightmare eagle appeared in everyone's line of sight. "Hurry up and hide behind the rock." Seeing that the nightmare eagle had returned, everyone panicked. Luckily, they had already reached the side of the mountain, and there were some protruding rocks there for them to hide. Perhaps it was because the nightmare eagle was about to reach home that he let down his guard. Everyone hid in a panic. Even though it wasn't tight enough, the nightmare eagle didn't notice them and glided through the air towards the mountain peak. Once the nightmare eagle was completely out of sight, everyone finally relaxed. They cautiously came out from their hiding places and looked up to observe the situation. Only after confirming that the nightmare eagle had returned to his home did everyone relax. Zhang Qiuming's face was green. He looked at the mountain peak a few hundred meters away, and his expression kept changing. After a while, he looked down at Fan Shouwu and said in a low voice, "Fan Gongzi, we can still make it if we retreat now. If we start climbing the mountain and get discovered by the nightmare eagle, it will be too late. Fan Gongzi, you have to think carefully. Do we want to go to the top of the mountain?" Fan Shouwu, who was originally full of confidence, started to hesitate after seeing the nightmare eagle again. Down the mountain or up the mountain? If they chose to go down the mountain, as long as they were careful, they should be able to return safely. However, Fan Shouwu was really unwilling to return empty-handed. However, if they chose to go up the mountain, it would be too dangerous. Fan Shouwu knew this all too well. Not to mention other monsters, just the nightmare eagle alone was not something they could handle. In the forest, the nightmare eagle's flames ignited the trees and caused a lot of trouble for everyone. However, it was these trees that blocked the nightmare eagle's flames, preventing everyone from being burned to ashes. In this place, there was nothing to hide. If they met the nightmare eagle again, Fan Shouwu believed that no matter who the nightmare eagle attacked with fire, they would be burned to ashes. There would be no place to hide. Looking at the mountaintop a few hundred meters away, Fan Shouwu hesitated. Zhang Qiuming, who had been paying attention to Fan Shouwu's expression, was overjoyed when he saw his hesitant expression. He hurriedly tried to persuade him again. "Fan Gongzi, this place is too dangerous. It's not a place we should be. Let's take advantage of the fact that the nightmare eagle has just returned and won't come out immediately. Let's hurry down the mountain." At this point, Zhang Qiuming felt that he had not finished speaking, so he added on, "Fan Gongzi, I know you want to give Miss Fu a black feather cloak. I can understand your intentions. When we return, I will definitely find a way to help you find out where to buy it. When the time comes, I will buy it for you. This way, won't it be the best of both worlds?" In the beginning, after hearing Zhang Qiuming's words of persuasion, Fan Shouwu was really tempted. Just as he was about to make up his mind, Zhang Qiuming mentioned Miss Fu. When he heard Miss Fu's name, Fan Shouwu, who had already planned to leave the mountain, immediately felt his heart burn again. Miss Fu's beautiful face started to sway in Fan Shouwu's mind. At this moment, Fan Shouwu's fighting spirit was reignited. He thought that if he spent money to buy a black feather cloak for Miss Fu, it would definitely not reflect his intentions. Especially when he thought of Miss Fu's icy expression. Fan Shouwu felt that if he spent money to buy a black feather cloak for Miss Fu, she might not even accept it. However, Fan Shouwu was confident that Miss Fu would definitely accept the black feather cloak that he had risked his life to obtain. When he thought of Miss Fu, who was like an iceberg, receiving the black feather cloak that he had risked his life to obtain, this iceberg would definitely melt. When he thought of this, Fan Shouwu, whose face had already turned red with excitement, made up his mind once again. Go up the mountain, I must go up the mountain. Even if I am killed by the nightmare eagle, I must go up the mountain. Zhang Qiuming was shocked by the change in Fan Shouwu's expression. Just as he was about to persuade him again, he heard Fan Shouwu say loudly, Prince Zhang, if you want to go down the mountain, then go down the mountain. After all, it is safer to go down the mountain. When Zhang Qiuming heard this, he knew that things were not going well. He hurriedly asked, Fan Gongzi, what about you? When Fan Shouwu heard this, he raised his head to look at the mountain peak and said resolutely, I must go up the mountain and fulfill this wish. When Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, his expression changed greatly. He hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Fan Shouwu's shoulder as he said loudly, No, it is too dangerous to go up the mountain. If you go up like this, you will definitely die. If that is the case, even if you obtain the black feather cloak, what use will it be? When Fan Shouwu heard this, he turned to look at Zhang Qiuming and said solemnly, I think that if Miss Fu knew that I was killed by the nightmare eagle because I wanted to give her the black feather cloak, she would definitely cry for me. When Zhang Ming heard this, he suddenly felt a little speechless. He really did not expect that Fan Shouwu would be willing to be killed by the nightmare eagle in order to obtain a single tear from Miss Fu. He really did not know whether this kid was smart or stupid. If he was killed by the nightmare eagle, what use would he have for a single tear? How interesting. When Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he became even more anxious. Fan Gongzi, although Miss Fu is beautiful and alluring, it is really not worth it for you to take such a huge risk. You should reconsider. Fan Shouwu waved his hand and said with a smile, There is no need, Brother Zhang. It is very dangerous up the mountain. You should bring everyone back. I alone will be enough to go up the mountain. Zhang Qiuming shook his head. How can that be? No matter what, I cannot go alone. You should reconsider. Let's go down the mountain together. Although the nightmare eagle is powerful, we can go back and slowly think of a way to deal with it. When the time comes, we can come back to hunt. Wouldn't it be much safer? Chapter 75. Seeing that Fan Shouwu was not listening to his advice, Zhang Qiuming was already sweating profusely. He turned his head to look at old Luo and said loudly, Come and persuade your young master. It's too dangerous to go up the mountain. It's better not to go. When old Luo heard this, he hurriedly walked forward and said loudly, Young master, listen to Prince Zhang's advice. Let's go back. After we go back, we'll think of a way. Even if we invite a few experts, we can still settle this matter. Why do we have to take the risk ourselves? Young master, I think we should go down the mountain as soon as possible. Zhang Qiuming advised again, Fan Gongzi, let's go down the mountain. Didn't you see that even Mu Hongyi and the others are waiting for reinforcements when they face danger? They won't rashly go. You should think about it carefully. Let's go back. People were like this. In fact, if Fan Shouwu was the only one here, no one would persuade him otherwise. He might have gone back by himself. However, with so many people trying to persuade him, not only did it not have any effect, but it also stimulated his fighting spirit, making him feel as if his blood was boiling. At this moment, Fan Shouwu even had the illusion that he was the hero of this group of people. Seeing that everyone was still trying to persuade him, Fan Shouwu waved his hand impatiently. Don't try to persuade me anymore. Those of you who are willing to go up the mountain with me, I won't object. Those of you who don't want to go up the mountain with me, I won't blame him. Now, you can choose for yourselves." When everyone heard this, they were dumbfounded. Originally, everyone had gathered together to persuade Fan Shouwu, but they did not expect that Fan Shouwu would actually let them choose whether to go up the mountain with him or go down the mountain with him. Everyone was speechless. How could they choose? They clearly had no choice. Even if Fan Shouwu's guards were beaten to death, they would not abandon Fan Shouwu and go down the mountain alone. If that was the case, they would die if they went back. Zhang Xiaoming and his guards had no other choice at this moment. If Zhang Xiaoming really abandoned Fan Shouwu and went down the mountain, then not only would their relationship come to an end, even the two families would hate each other. After Zhang Xiaoming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he pondered for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. "Fan Gongzi, I won't persuade you anymore. Let's go up the mountain together." Fan Shouwu was overjoyed when he heard this. He immediately grabbed Zhang Xiaoming's arm and said with a smile, "You are indeed my good brother. At critical moments, you are very reliable." Zhang Xiaoming forced a smile on his face and sighed in his heart. "If I had a choice, I wouldn't go up the mountain with you even if you beat me to death." Fan Shouwu's father was the deputy county governor. In the South County, he was definitely a figure above everyone else. As for Zhang Xiaoming's father, he was only the city lord of Qingmu City. The difference between the two of them was too great. If there was a gap between the two families because of this matter, then Zhang Xiaoming's father's life would definitely not be good. It was also for this reason that Zhang Xiaoming had no choice but to go up the mountain with Fan Shouwu. Fan Shouwu was overjoyed when he saw that everyone had agreed to go up the mountain with him. If he was allowed to go up the mountain alone, he would be a little afraid. If everyone went up the mountain together, even if it would not increase their strength by much, he would feel much more at ease with more people. In the end, Fan Shouwu looked at Zhang Meng and said with a smile, "The fierce brothers, you don't have to go up the mountain with us. I think you should know the way back." At this point, Fan Shouwu patted Zhang Meng's shoulder and said jokingly, "Don't get lost when you go back." Zhang Meng shook his head. "I'll go with you." Fan Shouwu was stunned when he heard this. He then said with a smile, "Okay, I won't stop you. Let's go up the mountain together. When we get the black feather cloak, I definitely won't forget the fierce brothers." Zhang Meng nodded and did not say anything else. He just turned his head to look at the top of the mountain. The sky was completely dark now. Only the waning moon in the sky was left, emitting a bright, white light in the sky. Under the dim moonlight, the originally steep mountain peak looked like a cylinder covering the top of the mountain. Since everyone had already discussed whether to go or stay, they all focused on the last part of the journey. After a while, Zhang Xiaoming said, "Fan Gongzi, the remaining part of the journey is too steep. It's too dangerous for us to climb at night. Why don't we wait until dawn to go up the mountain?" Zhang Xiaoming's words made sense. In the last part of the journey, there were places that were almost perfectly straight. If everyone wanted to go up the mountain, they would need to look for protruding rocks and then climb up. Climbing at night would definitely be difficult to see. Not only would the climbing speed be slow, it would also be quite dangerous. Not to mention anything else, there were not many paths for everyone to climb the mountain. They could only climb up in a single file. At this time, if someone in front accidentally bumped into a rock and startled a nightmare eagle, it would be a small matter. The key was that with so many people, the falling rock would definitely hit someone. Then, the person who was hit, no matter how injured they were, would definitely fall. Falling from such a high place would basically turn into minced meat. Everyone naturally understood this. After listening to Zhang Xiaoming's suggestion, everyone agreed. Although Zhang Xiaoming's suggestion was very practical, old Luo had a different opinion. Although climbing at night is very dangerous, the probability of being discovered by the nightmare eagle is also reduced a lot. Climbing during the day is safer, but what if the nightmare eagle flies out? The vision is so good during the day. The nightmare eagle will definitely discover everyone climbing. What should we do then? On flat ground, no one was a match for the nightmare eagle. Now that they were on a steep cliff, there was no way they could fight back. If we really encounter such a situation, we can't run even if we want to. After hearing old Luo's words, everyone fell into deep thought. Zhang Xiaoming's words made sense, but how could old Luo's words not make sense? If they wanted to climb the mountain, they would not only have to face the steep cliff, they would also have to face the nightmare eagle that could appear at any time. Climbing at night, the vision was not good. It would cause them to hurt each other. Climbing during the day, although the vision was better, there was also the threat of the nightmare eagle. No one dared to doubt the eagle's vision. It could be said that as long as the nightmare eagle flew above them, they would definitely be discovered by the nightmare eagle. At that time, even if they wanted to block it, they would not be able to. At this moment, after listening to everyone's thoughts, Fan Shouwu was also a little dumbfounded. It was originally a simple matter, as simple as climbing a mountain. Who would have thought that there would be so much logic to it? Chapter 76. When Zhang Xiaoming and old Luo talked about the situation, not only was Fan Shouwu stunned, even Zhang Meng was a little dumbfounded. If the two of them didn't mention this matter, everyone wouldn't have thought about it. Now that they mentioned it, everyone's minds suddenly became active. If they went up the mountain during the day and encountered the nightmare eagle, they would definitely die. Going up the mountain at night was difficult to walk on the cliff, and it was also quite dangerous. It was hard to say who would be smashed down by falling rocks. At this point, everyone realized that the biggest problem wasn't that the cliff was difficult to climb, but that it was too dangerous. Fan Shouwu's face was bitter as he glanced at everyone. He lowered his voice and said, "I must go to the top of the mountain. Now, everyone think about whether we should go up the mountain during the day or at night." When everyone heard this, they sighed helplessly. No one dared to make this decision. Of course, what everyone thought the most was, since going up the mountain during the day and at night was so dangerous, then they shouldn't go. When Fan Shouwu saw that no one spoke, he lowered his head and pondered for a moment before speaking slowly. "I'm guessing that during the day, the nightmare eagle will definitely fly out. As long as it happens to fly over our heads, it will definitely see us. It's too dangerous to do this. I'm thinking, why don't we all go at night? The nightmare eagle should be resting at night. When we climb the mountain, as long as we are careful, it shouldn't be a big problem." When he said this, Fan Shouwu looked at everyone again and said slowly, "I've decided to go up the mountain at night." When everyone heard this, they didn't say anything. There was nothing much to say. It was the same whether it was day or night. It was a matter of luck. If they went up the mountain during the day, if they were lucky, the nightmare eagle would rest for a day and not fly out. Everyone could go up the mountain safely. If they went up the mountain at night, if they were lucky, they could find a safe way up the mountain. Everyone could go up the mountain safely. Since it was a matter of luck, then let's go for it. As for whether they went up the mountain during the day or at night, it didn't make any difference. Seeing that no one had any objections, Fan Shouwu said in a low voice, "All right then, let's all get ready and go up the mountain now." When everyone heard this, they immediately began to pack their things. After a while, the group began to climb up under the lead of Fan Shouwu. The mountain was steep and it was nighttime. Everyone climbed very slowly. They didn't dare to get too close to each other. They could only wait for the front to be safe before they could climb up from the back. When climbing the mountain, it was naturally impossible for Fan Shouwu to lead the way. This time, it was old Luo who led the way. Old Luo, who was walking at the front, checked every rock in front of him one by one for fear that a rock would fall down. Only then did he take a step forward. Just like that, the group speed was not much faster than a snail's crawl, but there was nothing they could do about it. Zhang Meng looked at the mountain wall and thought to himself, "It's only because everyone knows martial arts that they can climb up bit by bit. If it were an ordinary person, even if they were a mountaineer, they probably wouldn't be able to climb up." Almost everyone was on tenterhooks. As long as there was even the slightest movement, they would definitely be scared out of their wits. They were afraid that a rock would fall from above. Most importantly, no one had a safety belt, so they could only rely on luck. When they first climbed up the mountain, Zhang Ming also thought about safety belts, but at this time, where could he find so many ropes? Although some people had ropes with them, there were too few of them. Who should use them was a problem. In the end, there was no need for ropes. Everyone relied on luck. On this rock wall, Fan Gongzi and Prince Zhang were useless. As long as they fell, they would all become minced meat. Zhang Meng walked at the back. He was mainly afraid that someone would fall. Although he wasn't very familiar with these people, he couldn't really watch them fall and become minced meat. As for the falling rocks, Zhang Meng wasn't afraid. Even if they fell on him, it wouldn't affect him much. Old Luo climbed in first place, Fan Shou was second, and Zhang Xiuming was third. The rest of the people lined up like a long dragon, climbing towards the top of the mountain. Although the mountain path was difficult to walk, everyone had martial arts. Although they weren't very good, climbing this mountain was no problem. However, although there were only a few hundred meters left, and it didn't sound that far, a few hundred meters of cliff wasn't that easy to climb. Everyone climbed for a few hundred meters all night, but they still didn't reach the top. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten, Zhang Xiuming was already sweating from anxiety. If they couldn't climb up before dawn, it would be terrible if the Eagle of Nightmares was a guy who liked to wake up early. He wanted to urge old Luo in front to hurry up, but after thinking about it, he didn't say anything. Old Luo was already doing very well. After climbing the cliff for a whole night, although they encountered many moving rocks, he led everyone around them. So far, there wasn't a single rock that they stepped on that fell. If they increased their speed, old Luo couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be any rocks falling. Just as everyone was climbing with all their might, just as they were about to reach the top, an eagle's cry came from above. Then, everyone heard the sound of wings flapping. Old Luo, who was at the front, was the closest to the top, so he could hear it the clearest. When he heard the eagle's cry, his heart suddenly sank. A chill spread from his heart to his whole body. His hands froze on the spot, and he didn't even dare to move. Old Luo held his breath and listened carefully to the movements on the cliff. At this moment, he felt that his surroundings were quiet. It was so quiet that he could hear his own heartbeat. Old Luo could even hear the cold sweat on his forehead and the slight sound of it falling on his clothes. At this moment, all sounds seemed to have disappeared. Only the sound of wings flapping on the top of the mountain kept echoing. After a while, another eagle's cry came from the top of the mountain. However, this eagle's cry was much further away from everyone. Old Luo knew that the Eagle of Nightmares had taken flight. Now was the time to decide their fate. As long as the Eagle of Nightmares flew towards them, there was no doubt that it would discover them. When that happened, everyone would be finished. When he heard the Eagle of Nightmares cry, Fan Shou felt a tinge of regret. Was it worth it for him to do this? Just as he thought of this question, Miss Fu's figure and that peerless face appeared in his mind. At this moment, Fan Shou's blood seemed to be ignited again. When he thought of how he was doing this for Miss Fu, he couldn't help but feel excited. Worth it, definitely worth it. As long as Miss Fu is happy, even if she just smiles at me, it's worth it. With Miss Fu's encouragement, Fan Shou's fighting spirit increased exponentially. It was as if his little universe was about to explode. However, Zhang Qiuming couldn't. He had never seen Miss Fu before. He had only heard of Miss Fu's looks. Chapter 77. Zhang Qiuming could only feel cold sweat all over his body. Even his clothes were soaked by the cold sweat. As the mountain breeze blew, he felt as if he was about to be frozen solid. The sweat on his forehead dripped onto his eyes, blocking his vision. Zhang Qiuming did not dare to move. He did not dare to reach out his hand to wipe off the sweat that was blocking his vision. Even though he knew that the slightest movement would not alert the Nightmare Eagle, he did not dare to. Zhang Qiuming wished that he could drill into the rock and hide so that the Nightmare Eagle would not be able to find him. Just when everyone was scared out of their wits, an eagle's cry rang out in the sky. After hearing this sound, everyone was ecstatic. This time, the Nightmare Eagle's cry was far away from them. No one knew how far it was, but they were sure that the Nightmare Eagle was flying in another direction. After a while, there were no more sounds coming from the top of the mountain. Old Luo let out a long sigh of relief. He retracted his hand that was frozen in the air. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and turned his head to look at the people below. At this moment, almost everyone was doing the same thing as old Luo. Everyone was secretly rejoicing that the nightmare eagle didn't fly towards them. After calming himself down, old Luo slowly moved his arms and legs before climbing towards the top of the mountain again. The sky was bright and the vision was better. Coupled with the fact that the nightmare eagle had flown away, everyone's climbing speed was a lot faster. When old Luo's head reached the top of the mountain, he suddenly felt a gust of hot air rushing towards his face. This gust of hot air was really hot. Old Luo subconsciously dodged backwards, but immediately felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly reached out and tightly grabbed onto the rock. At the same time, he retracted his head and did not fall down. Seeing old Luo's strange actions, Fan Shouwu, who was behind him, was shocked. He quickly asked in a low voice, "Old Luo, what's going on up there?" Old Luo took a deep breath and calmed himself down from being scared out of his wits. Then, he turned his head and replied in a low voice, "There's nothing on the top of the mountain. It's just too hot." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he finally felt relieved. As long as there were no powerful monsters on a mountaintop, even if it was a hot spot, it would not be a big deal. With his guard up, old Luo took a few more breaths before he poked his head out again to look at the top of the mountain. Hot air hit him in the face again, but this time old Luo was prepared. Although it was a hot spot, it was not a big deal. There was nothing on the top of the mountain. It was bare except for some dark red rocks. There was no dust on the rocks either. Since the terrain was high, even if there was dust, it would have been blown away by the wind. After carefully checking that there was no danger at the top of the mountain, old Luo endured the heat and slowly climbed up the mountain. Just now, when everyone was climbing the mountain, they felt that the cliff was very hot. When they reached the top of the mountain, old Luo felt that the top of the mountain was even hotter. Soon, old Luo reached the top of the mountain and whispered to Fan Shouwu, "Young master, come up. There is no danger up there." After Fan Shouwu heard old Luo's words, he immediately used his hands and feet to climb up the mountain. As soon as he poked his head out, he immediately understood what old Luo meant. Hot air hit him in the face. Even if Fan Shouwu was mentally prepared, he still felt dizzy from the heat and almost fell back. Old Luo was already experienced and was prepared. When he saw Fan Shouwu's body fall back, he immediately grabbed his shoulder and pulled him up. Only then did Fan Shouwu escape. With old Luo's help, Fan Shouwu also reached the top of the mountain. Feeling the heat from the rocks under his feet, Fan Shouwu felt a trace of regret in his heart. Old Luo sat on the edge of the mountain. He urged everyone to climb up the mountain while guarding against anyone being blown down by the heat. After an hour, everyone climbed to the top of the mountain without any danger. After Zhang Meng climbed to the top of the mountain, he began to look around. After looking around, he was certain this was a volcanic crater. This was because he saw that in the middle of the mountain there was a dark hole. From time to time, a trace of red light would appear. Seeing that trace of red light, Zhang Meng had a bad feeling. Looking at the situation, the volcano was about to erupt. Zhang Meng carefully looked at the top of the mountain again, but he did not see the nightmare eagle's residence. He was puzzled. He looked around again, but he still did not see anything. He felt even more puzzled. While Zhang Meng was looking for the nightmare eagle's residence, everyone was also looking around, looking for the nightmare eagle's residence. After a while, Zhang Qiuming said strangely, "Why don't I see the nightmare eagle's residence? Do you see it?" Hearing this, everyone shook their heads. Old Luo said doubtfully, "Could it be that the nightmare eagle's residence is not at the top of the mountain?" Fan Shouwu shook his head. "That's impossible. If the nightmare eagle's residence is not at the top of the mountain, why would it always come here?" At this point, Fan Shouwu's tone paused, and he looked around again before he slowly said, "That's right. I think the nightmare eagle's residence should be somewhere that we have not seen. Everyone, rest for a while. Let's look carefully. Since we are already here, we must find the nightmare eagle's residence." After Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he quickly said, "Since it's like this, let's not be in a hurry to rest." Let's hurry up and find the Nightmare Eagle's residence before it comes back. Fan Shouwu heard this and nodded. He looked around at everyone and said loudly, "Everyone, work hard. As long as we find the Nightmare Eagle's residence, the rest will be easy." At this point, Fan Shouwu paused for a while before continuing. "Everyone, don't worry. I'm not a stingy person. As long as this matter is done, everyone will definitely be rewarded. I can guarantee that everyone will be satisfied." After Fan Shouwu finished speaking, he thought that everyone would be energized and move forward bravely. However, he didn't expect that everyone was already dizzy from the heat. How could they be in the mood to think about rewards? Seeing everyone's dispirited appearance, Fan Shouwu didn't mind. After all, it was too hot here. Even he was too hot to speak. Seeing Fan Shouwu's impassioned tone, Zhang Meng was also very impressed. The temperature here, according to his guess, was at least 40 degrees Celsius. With such a high temperature, if it was an ordinary person, they would have already gotten a heat stroke. Fan Shouwu, this guy, still had the energy to give a speech and encourage everyone. He could be considered a talent. However, from the looks of it, the only person who was spirited was Fan Shouwu. As for the others, even Zhang Xiaoming, their heads were drooping, and they appeared to be dispirited. Chapter 78. After Fan Shouwu's simple mobilization, everyone began to move. The mountaintop was very large. Logically speaking, they should split up to search faster. However, in this situation, no one dared to split up. If the Nightmare Eagle were to return, they could gather together and look after each other. Although they couldn't guarantee that they would be able to defeat the Nightmare Eagle, even if they were to die, they would die together. It was too hot on the mountaintop. In such a short time, everyone felt that their clothes were completely soaked in sweat. Old Luo raised his head and looked at the sky. It was still early in the morning. The sun hadn't completely risen. When the sun rose and the mountaintop was already hot, then, thinking of this, old Luo hurriedly walked in front of Fan Shouwu and whispered, "Gongzi, let's hurry up and search. If the sun rises, I'm afraid that everyone won't be able to stand it." Fan Shouwu was stunned when he heard this. He immediately reacted and called everyone to hurry up and search the mountaintop. Everyone heard old Luo's words and didn't dare to delay. They all hurriedly stood up and began to search along the mountaintop. In fact, there was nothing on the mountaintop. There were rocks everywhere. Everyone was just searching for underground passages. It was just a simple search. In addition, the terrain was relatively flat, so the search speed was quite fast. Although they couldn't split up to search, everyone lined up and put some distance between each other. Then, they searched together. The search area wasn't small. Old Luo stood in the innermost part of the team, which was near the center of the mountaintop. Everyone was lined up, so he was closer to the center. Although it was only about 20 meters, the heat increased exponentially. At this moment, old Luo felt like he was walking in a steamer. No, even if it was a steamer, there should at least be some steam inside. But there was nothing here, only hot air. Although they only walked for a short while, old Luo already felt a little dizzy. He felt that his body had been squeezed dry by the heat. There wasn't even a bit of water vapor. Even his clothes that were originally soaked in sweat had now dried. After walking for a while, old Luo felt that this situation was getting worse. Even his vision became a little blurry. Even gasping for breath was a little difficult. Old Luo knew that this couldn't go on. If this continued, he might faint. Thinking of this, old Luo was about to shout at Fan Shouwu when he suddenly felt something wrong. He quickly turned his head and saw that one of his guards had silently fallen down. Old Luo saw this and knew that the guard must have fainted from the heat. He hurriedly endured his discomfort and walked towards the guard. Old Luo saw that the guard's face was red and his eyes were closed. At this moment, he didn't dare to neglect. He quickly reached out and grabbed him and walked to the mountaintop. As the leader, Fan Shouwu had been walking at the back of the group, observing the movements left and right. Among all the people here, his martial arts was the highest, and his inner energy was also the strongest. Although the mountaintop was very hot, he was still able to get used to it. Zhang Qiuming's situation was similar to his. After all, they were walking on a mountaintop's edge and not in the innermost area like old Luo and the others. Zhang Ming naturally walked behind Fan Shouwu. Although the mountaintop was very hot, Zhang Ming didn't feel anything. Zhang Ming was also carefully looking at the mountaintop. He wanted to find a nightmare eagle's residence. Just as he was looking around, he saw old Luo carrying a person and quickly walking towards him. Old Luo yelled as he walked. Gongzi, little Lu fainted from the heat. When old Luo came over, Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming hurried over to check on little Lu's condition. After a while, Fan Shouwu sighed. He's fine. It's just that it's too hot here, and he fainted. When old Luo heard this, he hurriedly asked, Gongzi, what should we do next? Should we continue searching? When Fan Shouwu heard this, he was silent for a while. Then he suddenly stood up and said softly, Should I go inside and take a look? When Zhang Qiuming heard Fan Shouwu's words, he also hurriedly stood up. I'll go too. When Fan Shouwu heard this, he nodded and didn't stop him. He took the lead and walked towards the center of the mountaintop. As they got closer to the center, the heat increased. The closer they got, Fan Shouwu felt the heat increase by several times. Originally, it was already very hot at the mountaintop's edge. Unexpectedly, after walking for less than 20 meters, the heat almost doubled. Fan Shouwu stopped and turned to look behind him. Then, he looked in front of him. He couldn't help but be aghast. They had only walked so close, but the heat had already increased by so much. Not only was the temperature in the air high, but the heat of the rocks under their feet was also increasing. Originally, they were wearing shoes. With the soles of shoes as a barrier, the heat couldn't be transmitted. But now, they could feel that the soles of their shoes had become very hot. Feeling the scorching heat and looking at the distance in front of him, Fan Shouwu couldn't help but sigh. It seemed that his thinking was too simple. Not to mention encountering the nightmare eagle. Just the temperature here was probably unbearable. Feeling the temperature here, Fan Shouwu suddenly remembered the purpose of his visit. Black feather cloak. If he had a black feather cloak at this time, that would be great. After walking for another 20 meters, just when Fan Shouwu felt that his face was being roasted by the scorching heat, Zhang Qiuming, who had been walking behind him, suddenly shouted, Fan Gongzi, don't walk. It's too hot here. If you continue walking, I'm afraid there will be a problem. Hearing this, Fan Shouwu couldn't help but stop. He really couldn't walk anymore. At this moment, he felt that it was difficult to breathe. The heat he breathed and made him feel even hotter. Fan Shouwu turned his head to look at Zhang Qiuming. He saw that his face had already turned red and his eyes were bloodshot. He couldn't help but be shocked. He knew that he had reached his limit. If he continued walking, he might really be in trouble. Thinking of this, Fan Shouwu didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly turned around and pulled Zhang Qiuming back. Zhang Ming stood at the edge of the mountain peak. Seeing Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming scout ahead, he was about to chase after them when he suddenly stopped. The temperature here was so hot. He felt that with Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming's martial arts, they wouldn't be able to walk far before having to retreat. Then what was the point of him going? Sure enough, Zhang Ming saw that Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming were walking quite fast at first. However, they gradually slowed down after walking for a short distance. In the end, they only walked for 40 to 50 meters before stopping. Chapter 79. Fan Shouwu and Zhang Qiuming returned to the edge of the mountain peak. Originally, they felt that the edge of the mountain peak was very hot, but now it actually felt very comfortable. After taking a few deep breaths, Zhang Qiuming's complexion recovered a little. He felt that they could not continue searching. If they continued, they would faint from the heat even without the nightmare eagle's help. Thinking of this, Zhang Qiuming raised his head and looked at Fan Shouwu. He sighed and said slowly, Fan Gongzi, do you still want to continue searching? Hearing this, Fan Shouwu turned his head to look at the middle of the mountain peak, then looked at the cliff below him and sighed. You rest for a while, Let me think. After saying this, Fan Shouwu turned around and looked at the entire mountain peak. His heart was unsettled. After going through so many hardships, they had finally climbed to the top of the mountain. However, they did not expect the environment to be so terrible. What should they do next? Go back. They were really unwilling. They were already here and were only one step away from finding the Nightmare Eagle's residence. Don't go back. The temperature here was still so high. Not to mention the others. Even he himself could not stand such high temperature. What should they do? Fan Shouwu really hesitated this time. If they went back directly, he would not be willing. If they stayed here, they would not be able to continue searching. After thinking for a while, Fan Shouwu turned around and said slowly, "We have already gone through so many hardships and climbed to the top of the mountain. If we don't search, how can we be willing? Therefore, I have decided that everyone will search at the edge of the mountain peak. If we are lucky, the Nightmare Eagle's residence will be at the edge of the mountain peak." After saying this, Fan Shouwu sighed and continued, "If we don't find the Nightmare Eagle's residence at the edge of the mountain peak, we will return immediately." Hearing this, everyone's spirits were lifted. In such a hot place, everyone had wanted to leave long ago. However, Fan Shouwu did not give the order, so everyone could only continue searching. Now that they heard Fan Shouwu's words, they felt a glimmer of hope. In fact, Fan Shouwu also wanted to leave. Not only was it hot here, but he also had to worry about the Nightmare Eagle returning at any time. Furthermore, he didn't know if there were any other monsters here. Although Fan Shouwu did not know if there were any monsters, he was certain that as long as a monster appeared on the mountaintop, it would be extremely dangerous. It could also be said that with their martial arts skills, as long as they found a monster on top of the mountain, they would all be in trouble. Seeing everyone's excited expressions, Fan Shouwu immediately waved his hand and said loudly, "Let's set off now and circle around the edge of the mountain. If we still don't find any traces of the Nightmare Eagle, we'll immediately descend the mountain." Yes. The guards hurriedly responded and turned around to continue their search. This time, no one dared to go deeper. After all, Xiao Lu's example was right there. If anyone dared to go deeper, their ending would definitely not be any better than Xiao Lu's. Even though they were only searching within 10 meters of the edge, the heat was still unbearable. Halfway through, everyone's body was no longer sweating. In such a hot place, the water on the body was almost evaporated, so how could there be sweat? At this time, Fan Shouwu also noticed that something was wrong. The people who were originally talking and laughing were now silent. They all hung their heads and looked listless. The two guards that Zhang Qiuming brought along had the lowest martial arts skills among these people. The two of them almost felt like they were swaying as they walked. These guards, including Old Luo, were all ordinary martial warriors. They had not cultivated any internal strength. In this situation, the time they could hold on was even shorter. Fan Shouwu knew that they could not continue walking. If they continued to walk forward, he was afraid that these guards would not be able to hold on. Thinking of this, Fan Shouwu turned his head to look at Zhang Qiuming. However, he saw that Zhang Qiuming was also looking at him with a face full of anticipation. Zhang Qiuming saw Fan Shouwu, looking over, and hurriedly said, "Fan Gongzi, are we still going to continue?" Fan Shouwu heard this and sighed. He shook his head. "Tell everyone to stop. We will now find a way down the mountain." Zhang Qiuming heard this, and a trace of ecstasy immediately appeared on his face. He hurriedly called out to the guards in front of him, telling them to quickly stop. They could finally go down the mountain. As long as they could avoid the Nightmare Eagle when they went down the mountain, this nightmarish journey would be over. After hearing Zhang Qiuming shout, the guards who had been muddle-headed from the heat suddenly became clear-headed. At this moment, Zhang Qiuming's voice was like the sound of nature in the ears of the guards. "Let's stop for a while. Let's go down the mountain." They could finally go down the mountain. After the guards heard Zhang Qiuming shout, they hurriedly stopped and surrounded Zhang Qiuming and Fan Shouwu, afraid that they would change their minds. Looking at these dispirited guards, Fan Shouwu also knew that it was time to leave. "Brothers, are you tired now? If you are tired, let's take a rest." If you're not tired, let's go down the mountain immediately." After the guards heard Fan Shouwu's words, their originally listless eyes suddenly lit up, and they all shouted out loudly, "We are not tired. We are not tired." Hearing the impatient shouts of the guards, Fan Shouwu turned his head and looked at the middle of the mountain peak again. He raised his hand above his head and waved it down the mountain. "Since you're not tired, then immediately find a way down the mountain. We will go down the mountain now." After the guards received the order, they immediately walked towards the edge of the mountain peak. When they reached the edge of the mountain peak, they began to look for a way down. It was such a steep cliff. Sometimes, going up the mountain was easier than going down it. Everyone walked along the side of the mountain and searched for a while before they finally found a place where they could climb down. Just like when they went up the mountain, they followed Old Luo and climbed down the mountain. Just as Old Luo climbed down the mountain peak, he felt that the scorching air had dissipated by a lot. When the mountain wind blew, he actually felt a little cool. This cool feeling made Old Luo, who was originally dizzy, suddenly feel energized and his mind clear up. Old Luo took a few deep breaths and began to climb down the mountain using his hands and feet. When everyone saw Old Luo go down, they lined up in a row and followed him down one by one. Looking at the dejected Fan Shouwu, Zhang Xiuming could not help but persuade him. "Fan Gongzi, although he did not get the black feather cloak this time, I think if Miss Fu knew that you were willing to take such a big risk for her, she would definitely be touched." Hearing this, Fan Shouwu smiled bitterly and shook his head. "You don't have to comfort me. If we didn't get it, then we didn't get it. What else is there to say?" Hearing this, Zhang Xiuming shook his head and said with certainty, "It's not the same. It's definitely not the same." Chapter 80. Zhang Xiuming couldn't help but advise Fan Shouwu when he saw how dejected he was because he didn't get the black feather cloak. "Fan Gongzi, actually, you've already done very well. How many people are willing to come to such a dangerous place? I think that when Miss Fu finds out about this, she'll definitely praise you greatly." Fan Shouwu shook his head and laughed bitterly. "Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's talk about how to get back." Although everyone had climbed down the cliff, the danger wasn't over yet. The nightmare eagle had already flown out. As for when it would return, no one knew. If by any chance they were discovered by the nightmare eagle when they were descending the mountain, they would still be in danger. When everyone heard this, the joy of escaping was instantly swept away. Only then did they remember that the danger wasn't over yet. Seeing everyone's nervous expressions, Zhang Ming couldn't help but laugh and say, "Actually, everyone doesn't need to be so worried." As he spoke, Zhang Ming pointed in a direction and continued speaking. The nightmare eagle flew in that direction. "We'll hide in the opposite direction and wait for the nightmare eagle to fly back. Then we'll be safe." When Fan Shouwu heard this, he was instantly overjoyed. He walked forward and patted Zhang Ming's shoulder and said with a smile, "Okay, we'll do as the Fierce Brothers said. When the nightmare eagle flies back, we'll descend the mountain." Zhang Xiuming frowned and said, "What if the nightmare eagle doesn't fly back for a while?" When Zhang Ming heard this, he laughed. "If the nightmare eagle doesn't fly back after dark, then we don't need to wait for it. While it's dark, we'll just descend the mountain. I think that after dark, it won't be easy for the nightmare eagle to find us." When Zhang Xiuming heard this, he suddenly understood. How could I forget about this? Okay, since it's like this, we'll do as the Fierce Brothers said. If the nightmare eagle doesn't return, then we'll descend the mountain after dark." Since they had already decided to descend the mountain after dark, everyone found a slightly hidden place and rested. After a day of torment, everyone was tired. Not only that, they were also thirsty. Being hungry was easier said than being thirsty. After staying in such a hot place for so long, everyone was so thirsty that their throats were smoking. Even if their stomachs were uncomfortably hungry, no one thought of eating. When the sky darkened, the nightmare eagle still didn't return. Seeing how everyone was so thirsty, Fan Shouwu was to immediately descend the mountain. Going down the mountain was much easier than going up the mountain. Naturally, the speed was much faster. Not long after they had left the mountain, they were already quite a distance away. Looking at the somewhat blurry mountain peak behind them, Fan Shou sighed. The plan this time was a complete failure. At this moment, an eagle's cry suddenly came from the horizon. Although it was very far away, the sharp cry still clearly traveled into everyone's ears. Hearing this eagle cry, everyone's originally relaxed hearts were once again raised. Hearing this cry, old Luo, who was walking at the front, shouted at Fan Shou, "Young master, let's quickly find a place to hide." When Fan Shou heard this, he bitterly laughed. "Where can we hide?" There was indeed no place to hide. There was no forest here, nor was there thick dust. If they wanted to hide, there was really nowhere to hide. Seeing that Fan Shou didn't reply, old Luo hurriedly continued to shout, "Let everyone lie down and see if we can hide." When Fan Shou heard this, he hurriedly waved his hand at everyone. "Everyone quickly lie down and don't make a sound." After the guards received the order, they didn't dare to be slow. At a time of life and death, if they were slow, they would definitely be courting death. Although there wasn't a thick layer of dust on a mountain path, it was fortunate that everyone's bodies were dirty beyond recognition. Lying on the ground, if one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't be able to tell them apart from rocks. In the distance, the eagle's cry came again. When everyone heard the sound, they knew that it was much closer and felt even more afraid. As everyone waited anxiously, the nightmare eagle came closer and closer. Under the faint moonlight, the people lying on the rocks could already see the black shadow in the sky. At this moment, the nightmare eagle didn't flap its wings. Instead, it spread its huge wings and glided in the sky. Looking at the nightmare eagle that was getting closer and closer, everyone was so scared that they almost stopped breathing. They could only feel their hearts beating so violently that they felt as if they would jump out of their throats if they were not careful. Very quickly, the nightmare eagle flew above them. At the same time, it began to flap its huge wings. After a moment, it began to circle back and forth above them. Seeing this situation, everyone knew that something was wrong. The nightmare eagle must have discovered something, which was why it was circling in the sky. Although they knew that the nightmare eagle had discovered them, no one dared to move. At this moment, everyone wished that they could drill into the rocks and hide. Seeing that the nightmare eagle was flying lower and lower in the sky, Zhang Ming felt that it had discovered them. Thinking of this, Zhang Ming picked up a small stone and held it in his hand. As long as the nightmare eagle flew lower, he would attack. The nightmare eagle naturally didn't know what everyone was thinking. It only relied on its powerful eyesight to discover that there was something different about this rock. The lower it flew, the more it discovered that there was something different about this rock. Just as it wanted to fly lower, suddenly, a sharp pain came from its body. It hurriedly looked down and saw that a rock had fallen in front of it. Someone actually attacked it. This was an unforgivable thing. The nightmare eagle was enraged. It immediately cried out and wanted to rush down and burn the person who attacked it to ashes. However, it didn't do so. Instead, it flapped its wings and flew away. After the nightmare eagle flew far away, Fan Shou sat up and stared blankly at the place where the nightmare eagle disappeared. He felt that what happened just now was like a dream. The nightmare eagle had clearly discovered them, so why did it fly away? At this moment, Zhang Xiaoming, who was beside him, also slowly sat up. He looked at the place where the nightmare eagle disappeared and asked curiously, "Fan Gongzi, what happened just now? Did you see it?" Fan Shou shook his head. At that time, everyone was lying on the rocks. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone look back. On the other side, old Luo also asked curiously, "It's really strange. I clearly felt that the nightmare eagle had discovered us. Why did it run away in the end?" Zhang Xiaoming saw that no one knew what was going on, but he wasn't disappointed. Instead, a trace of joy appeared on his face. No matter what the reason is, in short, the nightmare eagle has flown back. I think, for a short period of time, the nightmare eagle won't come out again. Let's take this opportunity to quickly descend the mountain. Chapter 81. Everyone was discussing the reason behind Nightmare Eagle's departure. Zhang Ming, on the other hand, was thinking about the direction of his future development. This time, he hadn't fought much. It wasn't because he was afraid of anything, but because he wanted to understand more. As someone who had just arrived in this world, if he didn't understand more about this world, his future path wouldn't be easy. Although he was the chief of the Twin Oxen Mountain Stronghold, Zhang Ming didn't want to be a bandit chief. Zhang Ming felt a wave of disgust whenever he thought about how he had led his uncles and his buddies who were as close as brothers to burn, kill, and rob, and how his buddies had walked behind him while baring their fangs to kill and set things on fire. Even if he didn't have the ability, he definitely wouldn't lead his uncles down that path. Moreover, he now had the ability to lead them down a righteous path. Zhang Ming was confident that under his leadership, the people of the stronghold would walk towards the light. He would let them live under the light and be upright people. He would let everyone give him a thumbs up and praise him when they heard about the Twin Oxen Mountain stronghold. This was what Zhang Ming wanted. If the people of the stronghold walked down the path of evil under his leadership and lived a life of burning, killing, and robbing, that way they could earn money quickly, but it would definitely arouse the hatred of the world. It was fine if he was in this world, as he could definitely suppress them with his strength. However, the stronghold relied on him. If he left this world, then the stronghold would definitely be slaughtered by those righteous people. At that time, when everyone heard the news, they would clap their hands and celebrate the destruction of this evil stronghold. Was this really good? Did Zhang Ming really want this kind of result? When he thought about how the people of the stronghold would become like that in the future, Zhang Ming couldn't help but shiver. No, he definitely couldn't do this kind of thing. Then, since he couldn't rely on his strength to lead everyone to do bad things, he could only do good things. He could do things that wouldn't make people hate him even if he left. After walking with Fan Shouwu and the others, Zhang Ming had been thinking about these problems. What should he do to expand and strengthen his stronghold? Of course, the foundation of everything was established in a proper industry. At this point, Zhang Ming already had some ideas in mind. Since the needs of the Magic Empire and the Anwu Empire were different, then he would be a middleman. He would set up an auction house in the Twin Oxen Mountain and auction all kinds of rare items. Zhang Ming believed that with his strength and his auction house, the auction house would definitely be the best in this world. At that time, as long as this plan's plan, the stronghold would definitely become the focus of the world's attention. Although this plan's plan was good, it was still lacking an important part of his plan. Gold coins, if he wanted to build a place that would attract the attention of the world in the stronghold of Mount Shuangniu, he would have to be rather luxurious. Only then could he attract more people. But all this was money's money. And this was the reason why Zhang Ming had stayed with Fan Shouwu and the others until now. Although it would be easy for him to steal some gold coins with his strength, this wasn't the kind of thing Zhang Ming wanted. If he was just a small fry, it would be fine. These people were not good people to begin with. However, if he was asked to do this kind of thing, Zhang Ming felt that he was somewhat unworthy of the martial arts he had obtained. After staying with Fan Shouwu and the others for so long, Zhang Ming hadn't come out empty-handed. At the very least, he knew that the Nightmare Eagle was very valuable. If he caught the Nightmare Eagle, he would definitely be able to exchange it for a lot of gold coins. Thinking of this, Zhang Ming raised his head and looked at Fan Shouwu, who was about to leave. Fan Gongzi, do you really want the black feather cloak? Fan Shouwu was taken aback when he heard this before nodding. The black feather cloak is indeed very important to me. Everyone knew that Fan Shouwu liked the prefectural governor's daughter, Miss Feng. However, Miss Feng didn't have any interest in him. Even when they met, they only nodded at each other. Fan Shouwu had also found a few opportunities to strike up a conversation, but it was useless. Miss Feng, who was known as the Ice Beauty, ignored his attempts to strike up a conversation. It was also because of this reason that Fan Shouwu wanted to do something big to gain Miss Feng's attention. Even if it was just a word, it would do. Fan Shouwu had given Miss Feng many gifts, but without exception, they were all sent back. This made him very depressed. His wishful thinking was that the gifts he gave were too ordinary and unworthy of Miss Feng. That was why they were returned. Since it was because of this reason, Fan Shouwu decided to give her something really good. It was also at this time that he heard about the Nightmare Eagle. The black feather cloak didn't increase defensive attributes. Its main use was as a decoration. It also had the advantage of keeping one warm in winter and cool in summer. Although practitioners didn't like this kind of thing, it was definitely a first-class item for a woman. In the beginning, Fan Shouwu really didn't expect the Nightmare Eagle to be so valiant. If he had known that the Nightmare Eagle was so powerful, he definitely wouldn't have come. Although Miss Feng was beautiful, but what was the use of being beautiful when her life was gone? The crux of this matter was Fan Shouwu. He thought that this trip to hunt the Nightmare Eagle would definitely be successful. Hence, before he left, he couldn't wait to send a letter to Miss Feng. In the letter, he told her that he was going to hunt the Nightmare Eagle for her and emphasized that he would definitely bring the black feather cloak back as a gift to her. It could be said that up till now, if he could turn that letter into nothingness, Fan Shouwu was willing to do anything. He hated that he couldn't slap himself a few times to express the regret in his heart. It was also because of this reason that even though he knew that the mountain peak where the Nightmare Eagle lived would definitely be dangerous, he still wanted to take the risk. Even though he knew that the Nightmare Eagle was incomparably valiant, he still wanted to give it a try. All of this was caused by that letter. At this moment, Fan Shouwu already knew that the plan to hunt the Nightmare Eagle this time was definitely a failure. Failing to hunt the Nightmare Eagle wasn't a big deal. It wasn't important. The key was how to explain the contents of that letter. What about the black feather cloak mentioned in the letter? Once he thought about how Miss Feng would look at him with that kind of disdainful gaze in the future, Fan Shouwu had a feeling of utter despair. His face was completely lost. How was he going to face Miss Feng in the future? When the two of them met, was there still a need for him to greet her? Seeing Fan Shouwu's constantly changing expression, Zhang Meng stepped forward and patted his shoulder, asking again, "Fan Gongzi, is that black feather cloak really important to you?" When Fan Shouwu heard this, he stared blankly for a while before slowly nodding his head. Important, extremely important. If I don't have that black feather cloak, then I won't have the face to meet Miss Feng in the future. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.